Hey there, tonight we're uncovering why it sucked to be a medieval stonemason. The truth is, chiseling cathedrals was as grueling as it was grand, with a constant dance between artistry and survival. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now get comfortable, perhaps dim the lights, or find that perfect pillow position, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your day begins before the sun even considers rolling out of bed. You, a fresh-faced medieval apprentice, are already up, feeling the chill that comes with a life devoted to stone. Let's not sugarcoat it. Being a stonemason's apprentice in the Middle Ages is about as glamorous as a mud puddle. Your mornings are filled with the delightful sound of clanging tools and gruff voices, the soundtrack of your formative years. At the tender age of around 12, when today's kids might be mastering video games, you've been handed over to a master mason. This isn't some summer internship where you fetch coffee. It's a full-blown commitment that might last up to 7 years. 7 years of hard labor, barely any pay, and learning to carve rocks that weigh more than you do. All for the noble cause of constructing the cathedrals and castles that future generations will ogle at while sipping overpriced lattes. Your master, the guy who's supposed to teach you the ropes, or in this case the chisels, isn't exactly Mr. Rogers. He's more of a drill sergeant with a penchant for granite. Your daily routine involves hauling stones, mixing lime mortar, and trying not to drop dead from exhaustion. And let's not forget the pay. If you're expecting a cushy paycheck, think again. You're more likely to receive room and board than actual coins, which is kind of the medieval equivalent of getting paid in exposure. Speaking of coins, let's talk about the economy you've been thrown into. The 14th century isn't exactly a golden age for financial stability. A skilled mason might earn around 2 to 3 pence a day. Doesn't sound too shabby until you realize that a decent meal costs at least a penny. And you, as an apprentice, you're not even in the same financial ballpark. Your worth is measured in the experience you gain and the calluses you develop. The cost of living is another beast altogether. You think rent's bad now. Imagine paying through the nose for a place that's essentially a wooden box with a roof. Food prices fluctuate more than a medieval pop star's popularity, often dictated by the whims of harvests and wars. You're stuck eating a lot of bread, maybe some pottage if you're lucky, and dreaming of the occasional meat pie like it's a Michelin star meal. Now, let's debunk some myths. There's a romantic allure to the idea of crafting magnificent stone structures, but the reality is far from picturesque. The grandeur of Gothic cathedrals didn't spring up from a mason's artistic vision alone. It was built on the backs of countless apprentices like you, toiling away day in and day out, often for an architect whose name history remembers, while yours remains unsung. And let's not romanticize the working conditions either. Forget the safety gear and modern conveniences. Your tools are rudimentary, your safety gear is non-existent, and the concept of workers' rights is as foreign as a smartphone. It's just you, a hammer, and a hope that today's not the day you lose a finger. But hey, at least you're building something that lasts, right? The irony here is that while the structures you work on may stand the test of time, your back probably won't. The toll that this life takes on your body is significant. Arthritis, back pain, and the occasional crushed limb are just part of the package. Yet there's a sense of pride in what you do. It may not fill your pockets, but it sure fills your soul. Or at least that's what you tell yourself as you haul yet another stone under the watchful eye of your taskmaster. Each chip and chisel brings you closer to mastery, though the journey is long and paved with sweat and blisters. So, as the sun finally graces your day with its presence, you march on. Your hands, stained with stone dust, carve a path not just in rock, but in history. It's a tough gig, but someone's got to do it, and today that someone is you. Keep chiseling, because tomorrow the sun will rise, and with it, another day in the life of a medieval stonemason apprentice. You take a deep breath, inhaling the scent of damp earth and stone dust, a fragrance less Chanel no. 5 and more eau de quarry. The sun might have decided to make an appearance, but don't get too excited. Its warmth is fleeting, much like the health of a medieval stonemason. Welcome to your daily grind, a literal and metaphorical battlefield where you face off against gravity, fatigue, and the occasional rebellious rock that seems hell-bent on rolling the wrong way. Forget about OSHA-approved helmets. You'll be lucky if you get a leather cap, the medieval equivalent of a paper hat in a hurricane. Safety regulations, non-existent. The closest thing you have to a safety briefing is a gruff warning from your master. Don't die. So, you tread carefully, navigating this minefield of loose stones and precarious scaffolding that sways under the slightest breeze. It's like walking a tightrope, except there's no crowd cheering at the end, just more stones to haul. Let's talk tools. Your toolkit is as basic as it gets. A hammer, a chisel, and a level, simple, effective, and utterly unforgiving. These tools have changed little over centuries, a testament to their effectiveness and the stubbornness of tradition. But they're only as good as the hands wielding them, and you're still learning how not to smash your thumb instead of the stone. The weather is your fickle companion, deciding your work schedule with all the predictability of a medieval alchemist's experiment. Rain turns the worksite into a slippery mess, a treacherous dance floor where one wrong step can send you tumbling. Snow and frost. They freeze everything in place, including your fingers. And when the sun decides to blaze down with all its might, you're left baking under its relentless gaze, wishing for a cloud to wander by and lend you a moment's respite. These conditions aren't just inconvenient, they're deadly. Mortality rates among stonemasons were notoriously high, with accidents claiming lives as regularly as they do limbs. It's said that for every cathedral built, countless lives were lost, their names as forgotten as the dust they became. Falling stones, collapsing scaffolds, and even simple slips could end a life or leave a mason crippled, a grim reminder of the dangers lurking in every corner of this medieval construction site. Deadlines, those ever-present spectres, loom large. The church or noble footing the bill doesn't care about your bruises or the weather's mood swings. Projects must be completed on time, and the pressure to meet these demands is as crushing as the stones you carve. You work from dawn till dusk, each day bleeding into the next, a relentless march dictated by the tolling of distant bells. But here's a twist that might surprise you. Despite the harsh conditions and the ever-present risks, there's a camaraderie among the workers, a shared struggle that binds you together, a fraternity of dust-covered souls who know the value of a steady hand and a sharp wit. The laughter that echoes through the site is often dark and self-deprecating, but it serves a purpose, a reminder that, even in the face of adversity, you're not alone. So, what keeps you going? Perhaps it's the promise of seeing your work immortalized in stone, a legacy that will outlast you by centuries. Or maybe it's the hope of one day becoming a master mason yourself, commanding respect and wages that actually put food on the table. Until then, you soldier on, each day chipping away at stone and hardship alike, each strike of the chisel a testament to human perseverance. For now, your life is a dance of stone and sweat, a balancing act between ambition and survival. It's not an easy path, but then again, few worthwhile endeavors are. As you wrap your fingers around your tools, you brace yourself for another day of grappling with the elements and the weight of history, knowing that every mark you make is a step closer to mastery, or at least, a step away from being crushed under the next stone. Ah, the life of a medieval stonemason, where the stones are heavy, the pay is light, and the social ladder is more of a slippery slope than a sturdy scaffold. You see, amidst the dust and toil, there exists this tantalizing notion that skilled craftsmen like you are the rock stars of the Middle Ages. But let's set the record straight. While you might craft rock, you're hardly a star. Sure, there's a certain mystique about being a stonemason. Centuries later, we still marvel at the cathedrals and castles, imagining the hands that carved such grandeur. In that light, masons seem like artisans of high renown, their work etched in history as permanently as the stones themselves. But here's the kicker. Despite wielding the power to shape structures that touch the sky, your feet are firmly planted in the muck of the medieval social hierarchy. Let's break it down. The medieval world was built on a rigid class system, as immovable as the stones you carve. Peasants till the land, knights joust for glory, and nobles rule from their lofty perches. Where do you fit in? Somewhere between the mud and the mortar. As a mason, you're a skilled laborer, which is a notch above the average peasant, but don't break out the good mead just yet. You're not exactly hobnobbing with the lords and ladies. Here's the paradox. Despite the prestige of your craft, your social mobility is about as flexible as a stone gargoyle. Your skills are in high demand, yes, but the rewards don't always match the work. Even as a journeyman, after years of grueling apprenticeship, your daily wage might edge up to a whopping 5 pence. Considering a sheep costs about 10 shillings, that's 120 pence, folks. You're not exactly rolling in wool. The guild system, meanwhile, is both your ladder and your cage. Imagine it as a medieval linked in with a side of monopoly board rules. Guilds regulate training, set standards, and protect the secrets of the trade. They're your ticket to legitimacy and protection, ensuring that not just anyone can pick up a chisel and claim to be a mason, but they also keep you in check, dictating where you can work and how much you can charge. Think of it as job security with a generous side of restriction. Joining a guild isn't a walk in the park either. It's more of a crawl through a bureaucratic maze. Before you can even dream of being a master mason, you need to prove your chops, literally. Your masterpiece, a showcase of your finest work, needs to impress the guild's eagle-eyed members. No pressure, but your future hangs on their nod of approval. Get it right, and you're in. Slip up, and you're back to chiseling away as an eternal journeyman. Here's the rub. Even as a master mason, the pinnacle of your career, you're still tethered by the guild's rules. They dictate everything from the projects you can undertake to the apprentices you can train. And while the guild offers a network and a degree of protection, it also means you're playing by their rulebook. There's no freelancing in the medieval world, unless you fancy a quick trip to the Starks for breaking guild law. Of course, this system wasn't all bad. Guilds provided a sense of community and brotherhood. They were a mason's family away from home, offering support in times of need and a social network before social networks existed. It's like a medieval union meeting with a side of ale, a place where you can swap stories, share a laugh, and perhaps, just perhaps, forget the back-breaking work waiting for you at dawn. But despite this camaraderie, the dream of climbing the social ladder remains elusive. The path from apprentice to master is long and fraught with hurdles, and even then, your place in society is more stable than it is upwardly mobile. You're respected, sure, but you're also replaceable. There are always younger hands eager to take your place, ready to chisel their way into history. So, while the stones you carve might stand tall and proud, your social standing is a different story. It's a sobering reminder that the grandeur of your craft doesn't always translate to personal glory. Yet, you persist, driven by the promise of creating something eternal, even if your own legacy is as short-lived as the latest fashion in hose colors. Keep carving, keep dreaming, and maybe one day, the world will finally see the craftsman behind the cornerstone. But let's pivot from the stonemason's social standing to the grander arena, where political and religious forces collide with chisels and stone. You see, the demand for your masonry skills isn't just about creating architectural eye candy. Oh no, it's a high-stakes chess game where kings, popes, and bishops are the players. And you, dear stonemason, are one of the humble pawns, albeit one with a really sturdy chisel. Let's start with the church, the medieval megacorporation of spiritual salvation. As you might guess, the church wasn't just in the business of saving souls. It was also in the market for some serious real estate. The 12th to 16th centuries saw a cathedral building boom that would make modern realtors drool. Entire towns were measured by the shadow cast by their cathedrals. Bigger meant better, and everyone wanted their town to boast the tallest spire. A task: make sure those spires didn't topple over. The church's deep pockets were lined by tithes and donations from the faithful, all funneled into grandiose projects designed to reflect divine glory. But let's not be naive. There was more than a hint of vanity and one-upmanship involved. Bishops vied to outdo each other, each wanting to leave behind a legacy etched in stone. And you, as the stonemason, were the medium through which these celestial ambitions were realized. Remember, though, this wasn't just about aesthetics. A grand cathedral was a magnet for pilgrims. Pilgrims meant money, and money meant power. So, when a bishop commissioned a new wing or a taller tower, they were effectively writing a check that bought both spiritual and temporal clout. And while your hands shaped these monuments, you could only dream of touching the coin that flowed in as a result. Now, throw in the political machinations of the day. Monarchs saw the value of these towering testaments and often aligned themselves with the church to cement their own authority. Need to assert your divine right to rule, commission a chapel, want to celebrate a military victory, build a sanctuary. These projects weren't just about stone and mortar. They were political statements carved into the very fabric of the land. But the fickle nature of politics. Shifts in power could turn your steady gig into a precarious gamble. When kings fell out of favor with Rome, or when rival factions took control, the funding for your grand projects could dry up faster than medieval ink in the sun. Wars, too, played their part in this high-stakes drama. The 100 Years' War, the War of the Roses, these weren't just footnotes in history. They were full-blown economic earthquakes rocking the foundations of your livelihood. You might be halfway through a grand cathedral when the call to arms came. Suddenly, your patron's priorities shifted from heavenly pursuits to earthly battles. Funds once earmarked for architecture were redirected to outfitting armies, and you were left with nothing but unfinished dreams and unpaid wages. Stonemasons often found themselves out of work, forced to become itinerant craftsmen wandering from site to site, hoping to find a patron with pockets deep and interests enduring. The Black Death, too, played a surprise role in the demand for your skills. As the plague swept through Europe, it wiped out a third of the population, leaving towns and villages eerily quiet. But once the initial devastation passed, the survivors found themselves with a sudden surplus of resources and a shortage of labor. Wages rose, and for a brief moment, stonemasons enjoyed a rise in both income and status as rebuilding efforts surged. Yet, this silver lining was as transient as the mist over a morning quarry. The economic volatility of the time meant that your job security was as stable as a drunken juggler on a tightrope. One moment, you were carving intricate designs for a cathedral facade, and the next, you were begging for work in another town because the local lord decided to spend his wealth on war horses instead of window arches. So, as you chisel away at your latest masterpiece, remember that your work is as much a product of political whimsy and religious fervor as it is of artistic vision. The stones you carve are shaped not just by your hands, but by the invisible forces pulling the strings behind the scenes. Each blow of the hammer echoes with the demands of a world in flux, where power, faith, and fortune entwine to dictate the rhythm of your craft. The life of a stonemason was a dance with destiny, precariously perched between the whims of earthly rulers and the promises of heavenly reward. But fear not, for our tale of toil and tenacity isn't over yet. There are more layers to this story, just as there are more stones to be carved. Keep your chisel sharp and your wits sharper as we continue to unearth the truths hidden beneath the weight of history. So, as we chip away at the myth of the noble stonemason, let's pivot from the daily grind and the political chessboard to the legacy these craftsmen inadvertently left behind. You see, for all the sweat, toil, and occasional lost fingers, medieval stonemasons shaped more than just stone. They shaped history. Their fingerprints are on the very bones of Europe, in the soaring spires and labyrinthine cathedrals that still draw awestruck crowds to this day. But let's not get too misty-eyed just yet. This legacy is as much about the shadows as it is about the light. Let's start with what these masons built, those architectural wonderlands that have become must-see stops on every tourist's bucket list. Notre Dame, Chartres, Canterbury. These names ring a bell not just because they are architectural marvels, but because they symbolize the zenith of Gothic art and engineering. And yet, behind every flying buttress and vaulted ceiling lies a story not of individual genius, but of collective heroism, and sometimes sheer endurance. Consider the sheer magnitude of these projects. Notre Dame, for example, took over 180 years to complete. Imagine working on something your great-grandchildren might finish. The stonemasons who started the job never lived to see its completion. Talk about a long-term investment. And while modern architects get the glory, it was the masons who did the heavy lifting, literally. They toiled through brutal winters and scorching summers, driven by little more than the hope that their work would stand the test of time, even if they wouldn't. Yet, it's easy to romanticize this toil as a noble sacrifice for art and posterity. But let's be real. For the average mason, the day-to-day was less about leaving a legacy and more about surviving to see another sunrise. Their lives were governed by the ticking clock of mortality, where retirement plans were as mythical as unicorns. Their bodies bore the brunt of their labor, with arthritis and chronic pain as constant companions, grim souvenirs of a life spent in service to stone. The irony, they built monuments to immortality, while their own stories were often washed away by time. Now, let's tackle the myth of the master craftsman as a solitary genius. If you think medieval cathedrals were the result of a single visionary's blueprint, Think again. The reality was a little less glamorous and a lot more collaborative. These masterpieces were the product of entire teams working in tandem, each mason contributing their skill to create a cohesive whole. It was like an epic rock band where each member played their part, but history only remembers the lead singer. Despite the lack of individual recognition, these craftsmen left an indelible mark on the world. Their work laid the foundations, literally and figuratively, for future generations. The techniques they developed, like ribbed vaults and pointed arches, revolutionized architecture and paved the way for everything from the Renaissance palazzi to the skyscrapers we marvel at today. Talk about an enduring legacy. But what about the personal toll? The lives of these stonemasons remind us that progress often comes at a cost, a theme as old as time itself. While we admire the grandeur of their work, it's crucial to remember the human element, the lives spent and sometimes lost in the pursuit of architectural perfection. Every stone tells a story, not just of artistry, but of sacrifice and resilience. And here's where the romance of the stonemason's life meets harsh reality. While their work might have been monumental, their lives were often tragically mundane. They were ordinary men caught in an extraordinary enterprise, their daily existence a grind of sweat and stone, their triumphs measured not in accolades, but in the simple act of survival. Yet, for all this, there's a peculiar kind of immortality in the work they did. These structures, towering and timeless, stand as silent witnesses to the lives and labors of those who built them. They are reminders of human perseverance, of what can be achieved when skill and ambition meet the grit and determination to see a project through, no matter how distant the goal. So, next time you find yourself gazing up at a Gothic cathedral, spare a thought for the unsung heroes who shaped those stones. Remember the apprentices who hauled them, the journeymen who chiseled them, and the masters who orchestrated it all. Consider the vast tapestry of human endeavor that each block represents, woven from the dreams and drudgery of countless lives. In the end, the story of the medieval stonemason is both a cautionary tale and an inspiring saga. It's a reminder that while we might not all leave behind cathedrals, we each have the power to shape something that endures, something that echoes through the ages. Whether it's in stone or in spirit, the legacy we leave is built one step at a time, one chisel stroke at a moment. So, go ahead, grab your metaphorical chisel, and get to work. After all, history is nothing more than the stories we choose to carve into its face. Michelangelo Buonarroti was born in 1475 in Capri, a sleepy village that's now a town of about 700 people, a place so small you could sneeze and miss it. But little did anyone know, this kid from a stone-cutting family would sculpt his way into the annals of history. The Buonarroti family wasn't exactly rolling in ducats. Michelangelo's father, Ludovico, was a government administrator, which sounds fancy, but really meant he was perpetually broke. He had dreams of his son becoming something respectable, like a bureaucrat, maybe even a banker. But young Michelangelo had other plans that didn't involve counting money, but rather chiseling away at stone, a less profitable but infinitely more interesting pursuit. In Florence, the Renaissance was blooming like a garden on steroids. It was the epicenter of art, culture, and power, a chaotic playground for ambitious minds. Michelangelo found himself in this vibrant city at a young age, absorbing everything like a sponge with an attitude. But before he became the toast of Florence, he was just another art student with a penchant for getting into trouble. In fact, one not-so-fine day, he got punched in the nose by a fellow student named Pietro Torrigiano. The result, a broken nose that would stay crooked for life. Torrigiano later bragged about this, saying he botched Michelangelo's nose, a claim that's about as humble as a peacock in a room full of pigeons. Despite the crooked nose, Michelangelo's talent was unmistakable. By the tender age of 13, he became an apprentice in the workshop of Domenico Ghirlandaio, one of Florence's top painters. Ghirlandaio, being no fool, quickly recognized the young prodigy in his midst. Now, here's where we debunk a myth. Michelangelo wasn't some lone genius carving masterpieces in solitude. He had formal training, thank you very much. And while it's tempting to picture him as a self-taught savant, the truth is, he had mentors who shaped his early development, including the eminent sculptor Bertoldo di Giovanni. Speaking of influential figures, let's not forget Lorenzo de Medici. the de facto ruler of Florence, also known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. This guy was the Renaissance equivalent of a talent scout with a taste for the finer things in life. Lorenzo spotted Michelangelo's potential and took him under his wing, inviting him to live in the Medici Palace. Now, that's the kind of patronage that could make any aspiring artist swoon. Imagine living in a palace filled with art, surrounded by the intellectual elite. It was like getting a golden ticket to the ultimate Renaissance workshop. At the palace, Michelangelo was exposed to the creme de la creme of society, including scholars, poets, and philosophers. This wasn't just an art school, it was a think tank. Here, Michelangelo could refine his skills while soaking in debates on philosophy and politics, which undoubtedly influenced his work. Lorenzo's patronage gave him access to a world where art and intellect were intertwined, a world where a block of marble could be transformed into a symbol of humanism and divine beauty. Now, let's talk economics. The Renaissance wasn't just about pretty paintings and sculptures. It was a commercial enterprise. Art was big business, and Florence was the Wall Street of creativity. The Medici family, wealthy bankers and de facto rulers, understood this very well. They were the venture capitalists of the Renaissance, investing in talent like Michelangelo to boost their status and influence. For Michelangelo, this meant not just artistic freedom but financial backing, a rare combo for any artist, then or now. But it wasn't all sunshine and marble blocks. Michelangelo's early years were also marked by intense competition and the pressure to prove himself. Every piece he created was not just an expression of his genius, but a statement of his worth in a city teeming with talent. Each commission was a high-stakes game of art poker, with reputations on the line. In this cutthroat environment, Michelangelo's works began to stand out. His ability to convey emotion and detail in stone caught the attention of patrons and peers alike. One of his early masterpieces, the Madonna of the Stairs, was sculpted when he was just 15. This low relief already displayed the dynamic composition and emotional depth that would become his signature style. It was a bold move for a teenager, but hey, when you've got it, you've got it. Another early work, The Battle of the Centaurs, was commissioned by Lorenzo himself. This piece, teeming with muscular figures in a chaotic struggle, showcased his mastery over human anatomy, a theme that would come to define his work throughout his life. Michelangelo's journey from Capri to the heights of Florentine society is a testament to talent, timing, and a bit of good old-fashioned luck. His early years were a cocktail of opportunity and adversity, shaped by the people he met and the challenges he faced. From getting his nose rearranged by a classmate to rubbing elbows with the Medici, each experience carved him into the artist he was destined to be. The young boy who once roamed the streets of Florence would soon become the master sculptor whose works would transcend time, leaving an indelible mark on the world. As Michelangelo's path unfurled before him, his early successes were merely the opening act to a career that would sculpt the annals of history itself. Enter the Pieta and David, two masterpieces that not only marked his rise to fame, but also showcased his uncanny knack for turning a slab of stone into something that could stir the soul. But don't be fooled. This wasn't some smooth ascent up the Renaissance ladder. It was more like a bumpy ride in a cart with a dodgy wheel. Let's kick things off with the Pieta. Picture this. It's the late 1490, and our young artist is in Rome, the city of ancient emperors and ambitious popes. Michelangelo was commissioned to create a sculpture for the French Cardinal Jean de Bilhers. The task, to depict the Virgin Mary cradling the dead body of Jesus, a theme as old as Christianity itself. The price tag, a whopping 450 ducats, which today would be the equivalent of a small fortune, enough to buy a decent villa in the countryside. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Pieta wasn't just about artistic expression. It was a strategic move. Michelangelo was a master at making stone come alive, and he knew that Rome was a city where reputations were forged in marble and bronze. For him, this was a chance to make a statement, to shout from the rooftops, "I have arrived." And arrive he did. The Pieta was unlike anything anyone had seen before. The composition was revolutionary, with Mary depicted as youthful and serene, a stark contrast to the tragic scene she was part of. It was pure genius, and people lined up to see it like it was the Renaissance equivalent of a blockbuster movie. But let's not romanticize this too much. Creating the Pieta was no walk in the park. Michelangelo was a perfectionist to the core, a trait that often put him at odds with patrons and peers alike. He carved the sculpture from a single block of Carrara marble, a medium so unforgiving that one wrong move could turn months of work into a pile of rubble. Yet, through sheer skill and an almost obsessive attention to detail, he produced a work that seemed to defy gravity, with drapery that looked softer than a Florentine silk scarf. This triumph, however, didn't come without its drama. The Pieta was initially unveiled without Michelangelo's name, leading to rumors that it had been created by someone else. Our fiery artist wasn't about to let that slide. In a move that was part genius, part hubris, he snuck into the chapel one night and carved his name across Mary's sash. It was the Renaissance version of a mic drop, and it ensured that everyone knew exactly who was behind the masterpiece. Not one to rest on his laurels, Michelangelo soon turned his attention to his next great challenge, David. Now, if you think of David as just another pretty statue, think again. This was a project with a backstory as twisted as a Renaissance intrigue. The block of marble used for David had been abandoned for over 25 years, a massive piece that other artists had looked at and said, "Nah, too much trouble." The stone was riddled with imperfections, and it was so large, standing over 17 feet tall, that it seemed almost impossible to work with. But Michelangelo wasn't one to shy away from a challenge. In fact, he thrived on them. He agreed to take on the commission for the Florence Cathedral, seeing not just a block of marble, but a chance to create something that would cement his legacy. This was a high-stakes gamble, akin to playing a game of art poker with his reputation on the line. The creation of David was a feat of logistics as much as artistry. Michelangelo worked for over 2 years, often in secrecy, chiseling away at the stone with an intensity that would make even the most driven of us look like slackers. He turned what was essentially a discarded rock into an icon of human beauty and strength. The finished piece depicted David not as a triumphant hero, but in a moment of contemplation before his battle with Goliath, a metaphor for the city of Florence itself, standing poised against its larger adversaries. But let's talk brass tacks for a moment. This wasn't just a labor of love. It was also a savvy business move. Michelangelo had learned the hard way that talent alone doesn't pay the bills. He was meticulous about contracts, ensuring that he received not just artistic freedom, but also financial security. The David Commission paid him 400 florins, a sum that would make any artist in Florence drool with envy. Of course, working on such high-profile pieces wasn't without its controversies. Michelangelo's fiery personality often clashed with the powers that be. He was known for his temper and his refusal to compromise on his vision, traits that didn't always endear him to patrons. He once famously quarreled with Pope Julius Roman II over the latter's tomb, a project that was supposed to be the Sistine Chapel of sculptures, but ended up being a drawn-out saga of delays and disputes. Despite these challenges, Michelangelo's work spoke for itself. David was unveiled in 1504, and it was an immediate sensation. People came from all over to marvel at the sheer audacity of it, a sculpture that not only captured the essence of the biblical hero, but also the spirit of a city that saw itself as the underdog in a world dominated by larger powers. Yet, while the world saw a symbol of strength and beauty, Michelangelo saw something else, the culmination of years of struggle, both personal and professional. His rise to fame was not just about talent, but also about navigating the complex web of politics and patronage that defined the Renaissance. Each piece was a testament to his ability not just to create, but to endure. As the echoes of chisels faded and the dust settled, Michelangelo's place in history was all but assured. The Pieta and David were more than just sculptures. They were milestones in a career that would continue to defy expectations and push the boundaries of what art could be. And while the story of Michelangelo was far from over, these works marked the beginning of a legacy that would resonate through the ages, a testament to the power of genius tempered by the trials of life. But the tale of Michelangelo was about to take an upward trajectory, literally. Enter the Sistine Chapel ceiling, the canvas of the gods, or at least the popes. This was no ordinary gig. This was the kind of job that could make or break a career. And who better to commission it than Pope Julius Roman II, a man with a reputation as fiery as Michelangelo's temper, and a penchant for grand projects that could make even the most ambitious of us break into a nervous sweat. Let's set the stage. It's 1508, and the Sistine Chapel is a bit of a fixer-upper. Julius Roman II, who was no stranger to drama, decided that the ceiling needed a makeover that would leave the world gawking. Michelangelo, despite being a sculptor at heart, was roped into this monumental task. And let's debunk that age-old myth right here. No, he did not paint the ceiling lying on his back. That romantic image of him reclined like a Renaissance astronaut is about as accurate as a Renaissance GPS. In reality, Michelangelo stood on scaffolding, craning his neck upwards for hours on end, a position that would make any chiropractor wince. Over 4 grueling years, Michelangelo transformed the ceiling into a masterpiece that would redefine the very concept of fresco painting. Working on an area of about 12,000 square feet, he created over 300 figures, each one a testament to his genius and endurance. But this wasn't just a physical challenge. It was a mental marathon that tested his limits. Imagine the sheer focus required to paint such intricate scenes day in and day out, with the eyes of the world and Julius watching your every move. Speaking of Julius Roman II, working under this pontiff was no walk in the Vatican gardens. Known as the warrior pope, Julius was as much a general as he was a spiritual leader. He wanted the Sistine Chapel to reflect his vision of the Church's supremacy, a visual symphony of power and piety. But Michelangelo and Julius had a relationship that could be best described as complicated. The Pope was impatient and often demanded updates. Michelangelo, being the perfectionist that he was, found these interruptions infuriating. At one point, in a fit of frustration, he even left Rome, retreating to Florence, hoping to escape Julius's relentless demands. But like any good drama, he was persuaded to return, lured back by the promise of finishing what he had started. Now, let's address the romantic notion of Michelangelo as a solitary genius, single-handedly crafting this masterpiece. While his vision was singular, the execution was not entirely a one-man show. Behind every great artist is a team of unsung heroes, and Michelangelo was no exception. He had assistants, talented painters and craftsmen who helped bring his vision to life. These individuals, though often lost to history, played crucial roles in the project, from mixing pigments to preparing the plaster. It's a reminder that even the most legendary of geniuses benefit from a little help from their friends. But despite the team effort, the process was anything but smooth. Michelangelo had a well-earned reputation for being difficult to work with. He was a control freak, obsessed with perfection, and often clashed with his assistants. The pressure of the project weighed heavily on him, and his infamous temper was never far from the surface. One can only imagine the colorful language that echoed through the chapel as deadlines loomed and the Pope's demands intensified. However, the end result was nothing short of miraculous. When the ceiling was finally unveiled in 1512, it was hailed as a triumph. The central panels featured scenes from Genesis, including the iconic creation of Adam, where God and Adam almost touch fingertips, a moment suspended in time that captures the divine connection between humanity and the divine. This wasn't just art. It was a theological statement, a visual narrative that spoke to the power and glory of creation itself. But let's not forget the economics of this venture. This massive undertaking wasn't just about artistic glory. It was a financial gamble as well. Michelangelo was paid 3,000 ducats for his work, a sum that sounds grand, but considering the scale and the labor involved, it was a modest reward for 4 years of relentless toil. Yet, for Michelangelo, this was never just about the money. This was his Sistine ceiling, a canvas where he could push the boundaries of art and leave an indelible mark on history. As the dust settled and the scaffolding was taken down, Michelangelo's place in the pantheon of artistic legends was sealed. The Sistine Chapel ceiling was more than just a showcase of his artistic prowess. It was a testament to his resilience and determination. It was a reminder that genius is not just about talent, but about endurance and the ability to persevere in the face of overwhelming odds. The ceiling stands today as a beacon of Renaissance art, a symbol of what human creativity can achieve when pushed to its limits. And while Michelangelo's journey was far from over, the Sistine Chapel marked a turning point in his career, a masterpiece born of sweat, frustration, and the relentless pursuit of perfection. As we look up at the ceiling, we see not just the stories of the Bible, but the story of a man who, despite his flaws, managed to touch the heavens with his art. And that, dear friends, is the true legacy of Michelangelo. As the dust from the Sistine Chapel ceiling settled, Michelangelo might have sighed in relief, if only life were that simple. Instead, he found himself catapulted into a new chapter filled with colossal challenges and a fair share of drama. Enter the Last Judgment, a fresco that would become both a masterpiece and a lightning rod for controversy. Commissioned by Pope Clement Roman VII and completed under Pope Paul Roman III, this was no minor task. Spanning the entire altar wall of the Sistine Chapel, it measured a staggering 44 feet high by 41 feet wide, a canvas large enough to turn even the most confident artist into a bundle of nerves. But why stop at the size when you can stir up a hornet's nest with content? Michelangelo filled the Last Judgment with a swirling mass of over 300 figures, portraying the chaotic final reckoning of souls. And oh, did it cause a stir. The naked bodies, muscular and dynamic, were a feast for the eyes, but a nightmare for the moralists of the day. In an era when the counter-formation was tightening its grip, nudity was about as welcome as a bull in a china shop. The Catholic Church was on a mission to clean up its act, and the Last Judgment's unabashed display of flesh was akin to a scandalous medieval tabloid. Cue the Fig Leaf Brigade, led by Cardinal Carafa and the Master of Ceremonies, Biagio da Cecina. They deemed the fresco inappropriate for a sacred place, a critique that surely caused Michelangelo to roll his eyes so hard you could hear it echo through Vatican halls. Michelangelo, ever the firebrand, retaliated by painting Biagio's likeness into the fresco as Minos, judge of the underworld, complete with donkey ears and a snake biting his. Well, let's say it wasn't his ankle. Talk about a Renaissance burn. Eventually, the church had its way. Posthumously, the painter Daniel da Volterra was tasked with adding strategically placed drapery, earning him the nickname Il Braghiton, or the Breeches Maker. But even with these prudish modifications, the Last Judgment stood as a testament to Michelangelo's unyielding vision and his ability to provoke thought and controversy in equal measure. As if this weren't enough, Michelangelo was also juggling another monumental project at the time, the renovation of St. Peter's Basilica. In 1546, at the ripe age of 71, he was appointed chief architect of the basilica, an undertaking that could intimidate even the most seasoned of builders. This wasn't just a building, it was the heart of Christendom, a structure that had to scream divine authority with every stone. Michelangelo's predecessor, Bramante, had left behind a design that was, shall we say, ambitious. The plan was grand, but it needed a visionary to bring it to life. Michelangelo accepted the challenge, but with his own twist. He scrapped the previous designs and introduced a Greek cross plan topped by a massive dome, a feat of engineering that was both daring and revolutionary. The dome, which eventually became one of the most iconic features of the Roman skyline, was a testament to Michelangelo's genius. He used innovative techniques to ensure stability, creating a double-shell dome that was both lighter and stronger. And for those keeping score, that dome is 452 feet high, meaning it could easily play host to any ego, artist or pope. But let's not romanticize this as a smooth sail. The financial burdens were colossal, and Michelangelo had to navigate a labyrinth of politics and power plays. The church wasn't exactly swimming in florins, and raising funds for the basilica was like squeezing juice from a marble. Yet Michelangelo soldiered on, working for free as a kind of spiritual offering. His dedication was unwavering, yet it came at a personal cost. By this time, Michelangelo was no stranger to financial woes. Despite his staggering talent, money was a constant concern. He was better at chiseling marble than managing accounts, and his funds often slipped through his fingers like sand. He was known to live frugally, subsisting on bread and wine, much like a modern-day artist trying to make it in a big city on an internship stipend. But this wasn't just about money. It was about legacy. Michelangelo was acutely aware of the impermanence of life and the enduring nature of stone. Each work was not just an artistic endeavor, but a bid for immortality. On the personal front, Michelangelo was a complex character. Despite his monumental achievements, he was often lonely, wrestling with his own demons. He never married, and his personal relationships were fraught with tension. His letters reveal a man who was deeply introspective, burdened by the weight of his own expectations and the relentless pursuit of perfection. In one of his more candid letters, he wrote, "I am here in great distress, and with the greatest toil of body. I have no friends of any kind, nor do I want any. If that doesn't tug at your heartstrings, nothing will." Yet, amid the turmoil, Michelangelo found solace in his art. It was both his refuge and his battlefield, a place where he could express the complexities of the human condition. His later works, though often overshadowed by his earlier triumphs, reflect a maturity and depth born of experience. They are quieter, more introspective, yet they carry the same profound intensity that marked his entire career. As Michelangelo approached the twilight of his life, he remained as committed to his craft as ever. He continued to work on St. Peter's Basilica until his death in 1564 at the age of 88. His passing marked the end of an era, but his legacy was already etched into the annals of history. The Basilica, with its majestic dome, stands today as a monument to his vision, a lasting reminder of what can be achieved when genius meets determination. And so, Michelangelo's later years paint a picture of an artist who never stopped pushing the boundaries, both of his art and of himself. Whether chiseling marble or painting frescoes, he was a man driven by an insatiable desire to create, to leave behind something that would withstand the ravages of time. It's a testament to the indomitable spirit of a man who, despite the odds, managed to carve his name into the very fabric of history. And as we stand in awe of his masterpieces, we are reminded of the power of art to transcend the limitations of the human experience, to touch the divine, and to endure through the ages. But stay tuned, because the story of Michelangelo is far from over. And so, as Michelangelo's chisels finally found rest, let's take a step back and peek beyond the marble to dissect a legacy that's both monumental and mystifying. Was he the solitary genius sculpted by myth, or was there more substance beneath the surface? Michelangelo's story is a tangled web of talent and turmoil, a Renaissance soap opera where art and ambition clashed gloriously. While history often anoints him with a halo of genius, reality paints a more nuanced portrait. First off, let's debunk the lone wolf trope. Michelangelo wasn't some rugged individualist chiseling away in solitude. Indeed, his masterpieces were the result of collaboration, even if he wasn't always the best team player. Sure, he had his moody moments. Who doesn't when they're turning rock into art? But he relied on a network of patrons, mentors, and yes, assistants. This isn't to diminish his brilliance. It's to remind us that even the greats need a sidekick or two. Economically, Michelangelo navigated a landscape as treacherous as a Florentine alley at night. His work wasn't just about artistry, it was about economics and status. In Renaissance Italy, art was as much a currency as coin itself. The Medicis and popes knew this and played the game like pros, using Michelangelo's talent to bolster their own cultural capital. Meanwhile, our artist had to juggle contracts and commissions like a 16th century freelancer, ensuring his art paid the bills while cementing his legacy. The Sistine Chapel, that was as much a power move as a spiritual triumph. Politically, the Renaissance was no Renaissance fair. It was a snake pit of alliances and rivalries, where a misplaced chisel could spell disaster. Michelangelo's patrons were often embroiled in the kind of drama that makes Game of Thrones look like a tea party. His ability to navigate these turbulent waters, keeping both his head and his commissions, was a testament to his savvy as much as his skill. But let's not get too cynical. The romance of Michelangelo's story lies in his ability to transcend these gritty realities. His sculptures and frescoes aren't just stone and pigment, they're a negotiation with eternity. Take David, a symbol of defiance and human potential, or the Sistine ceiling, a celestial narrative that continues to mesmerize us. These works remind us that art, at its best, is a dialogue between the divine and the human, a conversation that spans centuries. And what of Michelangelo the man? Despite his titanic achievements, he remained a figure of contradictions. Humble yet proud, introverted yet public, a man of faith who nonetheless wrestled with doubt. He was a work in progress, always striving, never quite satisfied. His letters reveal a man who was constantly questioning both himself and the world around him. In a way, his art is a mirror of these inner struggles, a testament to the complex interplay of confidence and insecurity that fueled his creativity. Fast forward to today, and Michelangelo's legacy is alive and well, thriving in a pop culture landscape that loves nothing more than a tortured genius. From movies to memes, his image and work are reimagined and celebrated, testaments to his enduring appeal. Whether it's the muscular idealism of his sculptures or the intricate narratives of his frescoes, his art continues to inspire and challenge. It's a reminder that true genius isn't static. It evolves, engaging with each new generation in fresh and unexpected ways. So, what's the takeaway from this whirlwind tour through the life and legacy of Michelangelo? Perhaps it's this: genius is as much about perseverance as it is about talent. It's about navigating the often harsh realities of life with grace and grit. Michelangelo's story isn't just about the art he left behind. It's about the struggles and triumphs that shaped his journey. His life was a masterpiece in its own right, a testament to the human spirit's ability to carve beauty from chaos. In the end, Michelangelo leaves us with more than just art. He offers a lens through which to view our own potential, a challenge to sculpt our own destinies with the same courage and conviction. His story, like his sculptures, is unfinished, a work in progress that continues to evolve, inviting us to add our own strokes to the canvas of history. And as we stand in awe of his masterpieces, we are reminded that true greatness lies not just in what we create, but in the passion and perseverance with which we pursue our dreams. So here's to Michelangelo, artisan, visionary, and eternal inspiration. May we all strive to leave our own indelible mark on the world, however imperfect, in the spirit of the great master himself. Nikola Tesla, the man whose name now powers electric cars, was once a daydreaming kid lost in the fields of Smiljan, a village that was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, now modern-day Croatia. Born in 1856, Tesla was the son of an Orthodox priest and a mother whose own inventive spirit was expressed through clever household gadgets. You can almost see young Nikola, with a wild mop of hair and a mind buzzing like a hive, scribbling down ideas while everyone else was busy with, chores and farming. From the get-go, this kid was obsessed with electricity. Legend, or at least family lore, claims that he once stared at a cat's back, static sparks flying, and wondered if nature itself was a giant electric machine. While most kids were busy poking sticks into ant hills, Tesla was busy pondering the mysteries of the universe. And if you think that's a bit much, well, welcome to the life of Nikola Tesla. Fast forward to his academic escapades, and we find young Tesla at the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Austria. It was here that Tesla's brain took its first serious deep dive into the world of electrical engineering. Graz was a city that boasted not only stunning architecture, but also an impressive university, where Tesla would spend countless hours engrossed in textbooks and electrical experiments. Now, it's worth noting that Tesla had a knack for being both a genius and, frankly, a bit of an oddball. He reportedly survived on just a couple of hours of sleep per night, claiming that more was a waste of time. Who needs REM cycles when you can dream up the future? Tesla's time in Graz is marked by a legendary moment that illustrates both his brilliance and his flair for the dramatic. During a lecture, a professor was demonstrating a direct current, DC, motor. Tesla, with his trademark intense focus, started daydreaming, his version of Netflix and chill. As he watched the motor in action, he couldn't help but think, what if there was a better way? Enter the concept of alternating current, AC, which would go on to become his life's work. But before that, he had to impress his professor. So, as one does in such situations, Tesla allegedly calculated a complex integral in his head right on the spot. Because why not? The professor, presumably both impressed and slightly unnerved, had no choice but to acknowledge Tesla's uncanny mathematical prowess. But let's not get too carried away with romanticizing this moment. While the tale of Tesla's mental math wizardry is captivating, it also serves as a reminder that genius often borders on the eccentric. Tesla's academic journey was not all smooth sailing. Despite his brilliance, he was known to be a bit of a rebel, often at odds with the more conventional approaches of his professors. In fact, his obsession with electricity and his unconventional methods led to some friction, and he eventually left Graz without a degree. Talk about a plot twist. Tesla's passion for alternating current was not just a flash in the pan, it was a spark that would ignite a revolution. At the time, direct current was the standard, and it had powerful backers, including a certain Thomas Edison. But Tesla, ever the visionary, saw the potential for AC to transmit power over long distances more efficiently. This was not just a scientific curiosity, it was a practical solution to a major problem. Imagine a world lit up without the need for power stations every few miles. Tesla could, and he was determined to make it happen. As we wrap up this first chapter in the saga of Nikola Tesla, let's pause to appreciate the sheer audacity of his vision. Here was a man who, even in his early years, dared to challenge the status quo with nothing but his intellect and imagination. His story is not just one of invention, but of relentless pursuit of a dream that would eventually light up the world. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning of the electrifying tale of Nikola Tesla. Tesla's dream of lighting up the world was about to get a hefty dose of reality, American style. In 1884, he arrived in New York with little more than a suitcase and a head full of ideas. Oh, and 4 cents. Yep, the man who would one day be hailed as a pioneer of modern electricity started his American adventure with less cash than you'd find under the cushions of a well-loved couch. But don't worry, he did have a secret weapon, a recommendation letter. Not just any letter, mind you. This one was addressed to the great Thomas Edison, the reigning king of electricity. Edison's been called a lot of things, but let's just say he was not known for playing nice with competitors. Tesla, fresh off the boat and full of hope, must have been thrilled to hand over that letter. Fast forward to his first meeting with Edison, and you can almost see the sparks flying, not the good kind. Edison's empire was built on direct current, DC. A system Tesla believed was as outdated as a telegram in the smartphone era. But the up-and-coming inventor kept his opinions to himself, at least initially. Edison, impressed by Tesla's credentials, offered him a job. So, Tesla rolled up his sleeves and got to work, tackling the task of improving Edison's DC generators. And here's where things get juicy. Tesla, being Tesla, not only did his job, but exceeded expectations. He proposed a series of improvements that promised to boost efficiency and cut costs. Edison was reportedly not one to lavish praise or bonuses, dangled a carrot, a cool $50,000 if Tesla could pull it off. A significant sum, considering you could buy a decent house for $3,000 back then. Tesla, probably envisioning a future where he wasn't living on 4 cents, dove headfirst into the project. Months of grinding work later, he delivered a generator that was a masterpiece of engineering. The payoff, Edison, with a straight face, informed Tesla that the $50,000 was just a joke. "You don't understand our American humor," Edison allegedly quipped. Ouch. With that, Tesla's brief stint under Edison's wing came to a dramatic end. Disillusioned but undeterred, Tesla struck out on his own. It was time for the Tesla Electric Light Company to make its debut. Now, starting a company with next to no capital and a handful of patents might sound like a bad idea. In fact, it probably is. But Tesla had something better than money, an unshakable belief in his alternating current, AC system. AC was the future, he knew it, and soon enough, so would the world. Setting up shop in New York, Tesla quickly found himself embroiled in the kind of patent battles that could make even the most seasoned lawyer weep. The late 19th century was a golden age for inventors, and a veritable nightmare for anyone who didn't enjoy courtrooms. The patent office was a battlefield, and Tesla's AC was a weapon of mass disruption. Edison's DC was entrenched, but AC had the potential to deliver electricity over greater distances with less power loss. This was not just a technical detail. It was a game-changer with profound economic implications. As Tesla's ideas gained traction, the battle lines were drawn. Edison, not one to bow out gracefully, ramped up his efforts to discredit AC. Enter the infamous War of the Currents, a public relations slugfest that saw Edison go to some shocking lengths, literally. In an effort to demonstrate the supposed dangers of AC, Edison orchestrated public electrocutions of animals. Yes, you heard that right. It was a gruesome spectacle designed to sway public opinion, but Tesla's inventions spoke for themselves. Amidst the chaos, Tesla found an ally in George Westinghouse, a businessman with a knack for spotting a winner. Westinghouse saw the potential of AC and offered Tesla a licensing deal that finally gave him the financial backing he needed. With Westinghouse in his corner, Tesla's AC system was ready to take on Edison's DC in earnest. The stakes were enormous. Control over the electrification of America, a market worth billions in today's dollars. But let's not paint Tesla as some flawless hero. The man was brilliant, yes, but he was also stubborn and eccentric. Stories abound of his quirks, like his obsession with the number 3, his aversion to pearls, and his rigorous daily rituals. A genius, perhaps, but not exactly someone you'd invite to a casual dinner party. Yet, it was these very idiosyncrasies that fueled his relentless pursuit of innovation. As Tesla and Westinghouse geared up for a showdown with Edison, the public was left to watch in awe, and sometimes horror, as the drama unfolded. The rivalry was more than just a clash of technologies. It was a collision of visions for the future. Edison's DC was safe and familiar, but limited. Tesla's AC was bold and risky, but full of promise. In the end, the real winner was neither Tesla nor Edison, but society at large. The electrification of America transformed every aspect of life, from industry to entertainment. It was a revolution that turned night into day and paved the way for the modern world. Tesla may have started with 4 cents, but his ideas were worth their weight in gold. As we leave Tesla on the brink of his greatest triumphs and trials, remember that the story is far from over. The world was changing fast, and Tesla was determined to be at the forefront. So buckle up, because the next chapter in the saga of Nikola Tesla is about to get even more electrifying. And so, with the war of the currents in full swing, Tesla and Westinghouse were ready to challenge Edison's stranglehold on the electric market. Picture a boxing match, only instead of punches, you've got volts and amps flying around. Edison, the reigning champ of DC, wasn't going down without a fight. Enter his most infamous tactic, electrocution as a public spectacle. Yes, Edison, in a move that would make even the most sensationalist PR firm blush, decided to demonstrate the so-called dangers of AC by frying an elephant. In 1903, poor Topsy, the elephant, was electrocuted at Kenai Island, supposedly to show the world that AC was too dangerous to be trusted. If that sounds like a circus act gone horribly wrong, it kind of was. But let's not lose sight of the bigger picture here. Edison wasn't just being macabre for the fun of it. This was a serious business move. The stakes were monumental. Whoever won the war of the currents would control the future of energy in America. And when we're talking about lighting up cities and powering industries, we're not just dealing with science experiments, but with the future of urban life itself. DC was limited by its inability to efficiently transmit over long distances, making AC the better candidate for the sprawling urban plans of the future. Tesla's vision was for power plants that could be miles away from the cities they powered, something Edison's DC simply couldn't achieve without turning every block into a mini power station. Now, while Edison was busy playing mad scientist, Tesla and Westinghouse were working on something a little more constructive, getting AC systems in place and proving their worth. The world's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893 was their golden ticket. Picture the scene: 27 million visitors, a city lit up by electricity for the first time, and all powered by Tesla's AC. Talk about a spotlight moment. Westinghouse won the contract to light up the fair, beating out Edison in the process. It was a game changer, a public demonstration that AC wasn't just safe, but spectacularly effective. The economic implications were staggering. This was more than illuminating bulbs. It was about illuminating minds. Industries could now be powered more efficiently, homes could be lit more cheaply, and the world could be connected in ways previously unimaginable. The cost savings were significant. AC systems were cheaper to install and operate than their DC counterparts. And while Edison was busy trying to scare people with high-voltage horror shows, Tesla and Westinghouse were busy making high-voltage history. But let's pause for a moment and address the mythological aura surrounding Tesla. He's often portrayed as the archetypal misunderstood genius, a tragic figure who died penniless. While it's true that he wasn't exactly rolling in dough by the end of his life, this wasn't just because Edison was a meanie. Tesla was also a bit of a financial disaster himself. He had a knack for inventing, but not for business. His partnership with Westinghouse was a rare moment of financial stability, but even then, his eccentricities and lack of business acumen often got in the way. He famously tore up a royalty contract with Westinghouse to help his benefactor during financial difficulties, a noble act that also cost him a fortune. So, while the World's Fair was a triumph, it was also a reminder that Tesla's genius came with its own set of challenges. He was a visionary, but he was also human, prone to mistakes and misjudgments. It's easy to romanticize him as a lone inventor battling corporate greed, but reality is messier. He was a complex character in a complex world, a man whose ideas sometimes outpaced his own ability to capitalize on them. The World's Fair was a victory lap of sorts for AC, but it was just one battle in a much larger war. Tesla and Westinghouse had shown the world what AC could do, but the fight for the future of electricity was far from over. Edison was down, but not out. And as the 19th century drew to a close, the drama continued to unfold with all the uncertainty and excitement of a new era dawning. The past was electric, but the future, that was still up for grabs. As we leave Tesla and his AC system basking in the glow of the Chicago lights, remember that this was just one chapter in a much larger saga. The world's appetite for energy would only grow, and Tesla's vision of a wired world was just the beginning. The war of the currents might have been a battle of technologies, but it was also a battle of wills, ideas, and quite frankly, egos. And with that, we're only halfway through Tesla's electrifying story. Hold onto your light bulbs, because there's plenty more to come. As the glow of Chicago's electric fair dimmed, Tesla found himself at a crossroads, a familiar juncture for someone whose life seemed to be one continuous zigzag between triumph and turmoil. With AC now a proven powerhouse, he turned his formidable intellect to what might be the most ambitious project ever conceived: wireless energy transmission. Imagine a world where you could charge your phone without ever having to hunt for a cable. Well, Tesla envisioned that future over a century ago, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. The road to wireless wonderland was paved with a few, shall we say, eccentric detours. First up, the Tesla coil. The iconic contraption that's a staple of science museums everywhere. Built in 1891, this high-voltage transformer circuit was designed to produce electricity without wires. It was a bit like a mad scientist's version of a party trick, except this one could light up lamps held by spectators standing several feet away. Tesla's lab was a veritable fireworks display, with sparks flying and electricity dancing in the air. It was electrifying, literally and figuratively, and marked a significant milestone in the quest for wireless power. But while the Tesla coil was a spectacle, it wasn't exactly practical for everyday use. It was more like a prototype, a proof of concept that got people talking but wouldn't exactly power your toaster. Tesla, however, was undeterred. Ever the dreamer, he believed that the coil was just a stepping stone to something bigger, much bigger. Enter Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's magnum opus, and perhaps his most audacious endeavor. Located in Shoreham, Long Island, this 187-foot tower was intended to transmit messages and electricity across the globe without the need for wires. An early vision of what we now call wireless communication. Tesla was convinced that, with enough power, he could light up the world from a single point. The problem: convincing investors to sign on to his grand vision when they were more concerned with things like, turning a profit. J.P. Morgan, the financial titan with a penchant for monopolizing industries, initially backed Tesla with $150,000, a staggering sum at the time, but still a fraction of what was needed. Tesla promised Morgan the ability to monopolize global communications, but as costs spiraled, Morgan's enthusiasm waned. Tesla's penchant for secrecy didn't help either. His cryptic updates left investors scratching their heads. Morgan famously quipped, "If anyone can draw on the power, where do we put the meter?" In other words, how do you make money off a dream if you can't slap a price tag on it? While Morgan fretted about dollars and cents, Tesla was busy pondering volts and amps. Wardenclyffe was supposed to be the crown jewel in Tesla's empire, but the economic realities of the early 20th century had other plans. The project stalled, and Tesla's financial woes mounted. By 1906, construction was halted, leaving the tower as a monument to both ambition and overreach. It stood for years as a rusting relic, a poignant reminder that visionary dreams often clash with the cold, hard world of economics. But let's not pretend Tesla was simply a victim of circumstance. His financial mismanagement was legendary. Tesla was brilliant but impractical, a man who could envision the future, but struggled to navigate the present, was known to spend lavishly on extravagant dinners and expensive suits while his projects languished for lack of funds. It's a bit like buying a gold-plated steering wheel for your car while ignoring the empty gas tank. And then there was the infamous death ray. Yes, you heard that right, a death ray. Tesla claimed to have developed a weapon capable of destroying aircraft from miles away, a peace ray that would make war obsolete by rendering any attack futile. The media, ever eager for a sensational story, dubbed it the death ray, and Tesla was more than happy to fan the flames of speculation. Whether this invention was real or just a figment of Tesla's fertile imagination remains a topic of debate. What is certain is that Tesla never actually built the device, and his claims did little to secure the funding he so desperately needed. It wasn't just the lack of funds that doomed many of Tesla's later projects. It was also his inability to adapt to the changing landscape of technology and business. As radio technology advanced, Tesla found himself increasingly sidelined. Guglielmo Marconi, the Italian inventor, capitalized on the airwaves with the first transatlantic radio signal in 1901, using techniques Tesla had patented. Tesla sued, but found little solace in the courtroom. Marconi walked away with the glory, while Tesla was left to ponder what might have been. Tesla's later years were a blend of brilliance and bitterness. He continued to churn out ideas, some practical, others fantastical. His mind was a perpetual motion machine, forever spinning out concepts that danced tantalizingly close to reality, but often fell just short. By the 1920s, Tesla was living in relative obscurity, residing in a series of New York hotels, his debts mounting as fast as his ideas. Yet even as his financial situation deteriorated, Tesla's spirit remained unbroken. He was a man who never stopped dreaming, who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Perhaps that's why he's so endlessly fascinating, a figure who straddles the line between genius and folly, between the possible and the impossible. Tesla's legacy is a curious one. He was a man out of time, whose dreams were too big for the era in which he lived. His story is a testament to the power of imagination, but also a cautionary tale about the limits of vision unmoored from practicalities. As we look back on his life, we're reminded that while dreams can illuminate the path forward, they must be grounded in reality to truly shine. And yet, in Tesla's case, it's those very dreams that continue to inspire and captivate us, long after the lights have dimmed. As Tesla's grand dreams faltered against the unforgiving backdrop of financial ruin and technological competition, he found himself retreating into an increasingly peculiar existence. Picture him in the 1930, nestled in a New York hotel room, not exactly the hero's lair one might expect. Instead, he's surrounded by stacks of paper, piles of unpaid bills, and a surprising flock of pigeons that he tended to with the kind of devotion that would make any birdwatcher proud. For a man who once envisioned lighting the world, it's a decidedly dim setting. Tesla's decline wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a cautionary tale about the precarious balance between genius and practicality. In the world of big ideas, execution is king, and our dear Nikola had a knack for conjuring visions that were as grand as they were unbankable. By the time he was holed up in his hotel sanctuary, Tesla was largely forgotten by the public, his name overshadowed by more commercially savvy contemporaries. Yet his contributions were as real as the electric hum of modern life. Let's not sugarcoat it. Tesla's financial acumen was as erratic as his sleep schedule. Despite groundbreaking patents and world-altering insights, he died impoverished in 1943 at the age of 86. The irony: he passed away in the New Yorker hotel, a building powered by the very AC systems he had championed. Talk about living in the literal shadow of your own legacy. Tesla's life was a roller coaster of highs and lows, a testament to the unpredictable nature of invention. While he dreamed of transmitting energy wirelessly, his lack of financial foresight often left him wandering in the dark. His relationship with money was akin to his relationship with reality, occasionally tenuous and frequently overlooked. This wasn't a man who kept a tidy ledger. In his later years, Tesla's eccentricities flourished. Not just content with feeding pigeons, he claimed to have fallen in love with one particularly radiant specimen, describing her as a beautiful female bird, pure white with light grey tips on her wings. Her presence, he claimed, brought him light. This poignant and bizarre affection might sound like the stuff of tabloids, but it shines a light on Tesla's complex psyche, a man searching for connection in a world that had moved on without him. Yet, despite these quirks, Tesla's legacy is undeniable. His alternating current technology became the backbone of modern electrical systems, a revolutionary concept that transformed industries and powered cities. Without him, the world might still be grappling with the inefficiencies of Edison's DC systems. Tesla didn't just imagine the future, he wired it. And what of the myths? The stories of Tesla's death ray and wireless towers have become the stuff of legend, feeding the popular imagination with tales of a mad genius. In truth, while these stories are tantalizing, they often overshadow the very real and practical achievements he made. Tesla was a visionary, but he wasn't a wizard. His death ray never materialized beyond sketches and speculation, yet it captured the public's imagination in a way few inventions could. As we sift through the myths and realities of Tesla's life, it's essential to recognize the tension between his genius and his impracticality. He was a man who dared to dream in color in a world that often saw in black and white. His ideas were ahead of their time, but his inability to commercialize them left him behind. Tesla's story is a reminder of the fine line between pioneering innovation and economic viability. It's a narrative as electrifying as it is sobering. While we celebrate the breakthroughs, we must also acknowledge the challenges of turning vision into reality. His life invites us to ponder the cost of genius when untethered from the mundane necessities of daily life. In reflecting on Tesla's legacy, we find a man who was both a product of his time and an outlier within it. He was a dreamer who dared to imagine a world transformed by electricity, a visionary whose ideas flickered like the electric arcs in his laboratory. His life's work laid the foundation for modern technology, even as his personal fortunes dimmed. In the end, Tesla's story is not just about the triumph of innovation, but also about the human condition, a tale of ambition, failure, and the relentless pursuit of a brighter future. As we power up our gadgets and illuminate our homes, we owe a nod to the man who, despite his flaws, dared to dream big. Tesla reminds us that while great ideas can light up the world, they must be grounded in practicality to truly endure. His life, like his inventions, was a brilliant spark that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. The rooster crows at dawn, and there you are, blinking into the early Roman light. Welcome to your day in ancient Rome, where the streets are bustling, the air is thick with the smell of fresh bread, and your to-do list is longer than the Appian Way. As a Roman woman, your day kicks off before the sun has a chance to fully stretch across the sky. You've got a household to run, and let's just say there's no such thing as a lazy morning here. First on your agenda, managing the household slaves. Now, before we get all misty-eyed with romantic notions of the noble Roman matron gracefully orchestrating her domestic empire, let's set the record straight. The ideal Roman matron, that paragon of virtue, chastity, and domestic bliss, was mostly a construct. Sure, she pops up in literature as the perfect wife, but like most things in life, reality was a bit messier. You're juggling a lot more than just toga folding and sandal polishing. Running a Roman household is a full-time gig, and then some. The average Roman family could own anywhere from a handful to over 100 slaves, depending on their wealth and status. These folks aren't just lounging around. They're your workforce, handling everything from cooking to cleaning to managing your unruly garden. Your role is to oversee them, make sure they're not slacking off, and keep the household functioning smoothly. It's like being the CEO of a small, bustling company without any of the modern perks like coffee breaks or an HR department. Next up, household finances. Here's where the myth of the passive Roman woman really gets a run for its money. In reality, Roman women often played a crucial role in managing the family's finances. They might not have been running to the market themselves, though some did, but they were definitely making decisions about where the money went. Think of it as ancient budget planning. You're keeping track of expenses, making sure the household doesn't run out of olive oil before the next harvest, and balancing the books with the precision of an accountant. And let's talk numbers for a second. An average Roman family might spend about 200 sesterces on weekly groceries, bread, fish, wine, the essentials. That's roughly the annual salary of a common soldier, just to put it in perspective. So, While the men might have been out conquering Gaul or debating in the Senate, you were ensuring that the family didn't go bankrupt buying too much garum. The economic realities of Roman life were far from the leisurely image of reclining on couches while being fed grapes. Women were economic players, often actively involved in the family business. In fact, some women owned property and ran businesses themselves. Take Eumatia, a prominent woman from Pompeii who was a public priestess and owned a lucrative brick-making business. She wasn't just sitting pretty. She was making bank and leaving her mark on the city with a grand building named after her. But let's get back to the morning grind. As you move through your day, you'll find that the lines between public and private spheres are blurrier than you might think. Women, though excluded from formal political power, wielded considerable influence within the household and beyond. They could advocate for their families, negotiate marriages, and even involve themselves in the political machinations of their husbands, often with a strategic genius that would put Machiavelli to shame. So, as you sip your watered-down wine for breakfast, take a moment to appreciate the complexity of your position. You're not just a footnote in history. You're a vital cog in the grand machine of Roman society. Whether you're managing slaves, balancing the books, or subtly steering your husband's political career, your role is anything but passive. It's a dance of power and responsibility played out under the watchful eye of society, and it's only just begun. As the morning sun climbs higher, let's dive headfirst into the tangled web of Roman law, where women's rights were about as solid as a sandcastle at high tide. You, dear Roman woman, are about to navigate a legal landscape that would make a modern lawyer's head spin. First up, the merry institution of marriage. For you, marriage isn't just about love or companionship. It's a business contract with more terms and conditions than a modern-day software license agreement. The marriage game starts with the do's and don'ts of dowries. Dowries were essentially your ticket to the matrimonial roller coaster. They could range from a modest few thousand sesterces to a whopping couple of million, depending on your family's wealth. Think of it as the original version of putting a ring on it, except here, the bling came with a side of livestock or a villa on the coast. The dowry wasn't just a gift. It was a financial cushion for your new life, but it also came with strings attached, often returning to your family if things went south. Once you're hitched, you're introduced to the charming legal concept of manus. No, it's not a fancy ancient Roman manicure. Under manus, a woman was legally transferred from her father's control to her husband's. It's like passing the baton in a relay race, except you're the baton. Not every marriage was under manus. Some women remained under their father's control even after marrying. A choice between the devil and the deep blue sea, perhaps. But here's the kicker. Under manus, your husband could technically sell you. That's right, you could end up on the market like a particularly prized piece of pottery. Now, let's talk about property rights, or the lack thereof. Roman women could own property, but it was a bit like owning a car where you're not allowed to drive. Technically, you could have your name on the deeds, but any significant decision needed the green light from a male guardian. In reality, some women navigated these restrictions with the skill of a diplomat, using their husband's or father's influence to manage their assets. But legally, it was a bit like playing Monopoly with half the pieces missing. The contradictions don't stop there. Women were expected to be the paragons of virtue and modesty, yet their economic and social prowess was often crucial for the family's survival. It's a classic case of do as I say, not as I do, where societal expectations were about as consistent as the British weather. You're expected to embody chastity and fidelity, but also manage the household with the cunning of a seasoned CEO. Society wanted the perfect wife, but reality demanded far more. And then there was the delightful duty of childbearing. Women were expected to produce heirs like it was their full-time job, which honestly, it kind of was. The average Roman woman could expect to have around 5 children, but with a mortality rate that could make a horror movie seem tame. Not all would survive to adulthood. It was a brutal reality that underscored the importance of women in securing the family line, even while they were legally sidelined. The Roman legal system was a patchwork quilt of contradictions and concessions. As a woman, your legal identity was often defined by the men around you, yet your influence could be profound. You were a silent partner in the family firm, your contributions as crucial as they were unacknowledged. But don't get too comfortable. The balance of power could shift as quickly as the Tiber in flood season. In every corner of Roman life, women were both indispensable and invisible, expected to uphold societal norms while deftly maneuvering through them. The legal rights of Roman women, or lack thereof, paint a picture of a society trying to reconcile its own contradictions. You were expected to be both the ideal matron and a shrewd operator, a balancing act that required finesse, strategy, and a sense of humor as dry as a Roman summer. So, as the day wears on, and you navigate the twisted corridors of Roman law, take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. While you might not have the rights of a Roman man, you have the wit and cunning to make those legal loopholes work in your favor. You're not just surviving in this patriarchal playground. You're thriving, one legal contradiction at a time. Stay tuned, because this ancient soap opera is far from over. And just when you think you've got this whole Roman life gig all figured out, the afternoon rolls around, not so much like a gentle breeze, but more like a chariot race with no finish line in sight. You might be tempted to imagine a Roman woman lounging with a goblet of wine in hand, surrounded by a posse of well-groomed friends. But in reality, the afternoon is where the real action begins. We're talking religious duties and social strategizing, not a leisurely siesta. Let's dive into the world of Roman religious life, where women weren't just bystanders. They were more like key players at the heart of the game. First up, the Vestal Virgins. These ladies had the VIP pass to the religious world, serving as priestesses to Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. Imagine having a job that requires you to tend a sacred fire, and if it goes out, it's not just a slap on the wrist, but a full-on societal panic. Talk about pressure. Vestal Virgins were chosen between the tender ages of 6 and 10, committing to 30 years of service, 10 years in training, 10 in active duty, and 10 teaching the newbies. It was like the ultimate internship, but with divine stakes. Now, being a Vestal Virgin wasn't all doom and gloom. These women had privileges that would make any Roman matron a bit envious. They could own property, make their own wills, and even free condemned prisoners with a simple touch. And let's not forget the primo seats at the games. Yet the catch, absolute chastity, was non-negotiable, with the penalty for breaking the vow being buried alive. It's the kind of job where the perks come with some seriously heavy fine print. Beyond the Vestals, there were other roles for women in the religious sphere. The Flaminica Diales, for example, was the wife of the high priest of Jupiter. Her job was to perform specific rituals, and she had to be a living symbol of chastity and fidelity. But here's the kicker. If her husband died, she couldn't remarry. It's almost like they wanted to ensure her loyalty to Jupiter was lifelong, even if her earthly partner wasn't. Women's involvement in religious activities wasn't just limited to being priestesses. Many participated in religious festivals and public rites, wielding influence that was often overlooked by the male scribes of history. The Festival of Bona Dea, for instance, was an exclusive, women-only event. Men were banned from even knowing what went on behind those closed doors. Talk about a secret society. And while the details remain as mysterious as the ingredients in a Roman stew, it's clear that these gatherings were crucial for social networking and community building among women. Yet, despite these religious roles, the romanticized notion of pious women in flowing stolas, leisurely wafting through sacred spaces, is as much a myth as Romulus and Remus being raised by a she-wolf. In truth, these activities were part of a complex web of societal obligations and power plays. Women wielded influence, sure, but they also navigated a labyrinth of expectations and restrictions, balancing their public roles with private responsibilities. But let's not forget the social side of the afternoon. While the men were busy debating the latest political scandals in the forum, women gathered for their own brand of social strategizing. The elite Roman woman's calendar was dotted with social visits that were as much about forging alliances as they were about friendship. You'd find yourself at the home of a fellow matron, sipping watered-down wine, again, and discussing everything from the latest fashions to the juiciest gossip. These gatherings were where the real power plays happened. Behind every great Roman man, there was often a woman whispering in his ear, nudging him towards alliances that would benefit the family. Think of it as the original version of networking, where instead of LinkedIn connections, you had family alliances and marital links. And while these meetings might seem trivial, they were anything but. Women like Livia Drusilla wife of Emperor Augustus, were legendary for their influence in political circles, often steering the course of Roman politics from the shadows. In these social settings, the rules of engagement were clear. You needed to be charming, strategic, and ever so slightly ruthless. It was a delicate dance of politics and propriety, where a misplaced comment could unravel years of carefully crafted alliances. And let's be honest, the stakes were high. Your family's fortune and future could hinge on these social interactions. Yet, the romantic image of the Roman woman as a passive participant in public life is a narrative that needs some serious reworking. While they were barred from holding official political power, many women wielded influence in ways that were subtle yet profound. They were the architects of family fortunes, the weavers of alliances, and the silent power brokers of Roman society. So, as the afternoon sun dips lower, casting long shadows over the columns and cobblestones of Rome, take a moment to appreciate the intricate tapestry of women's lives in this ancient world. They were not just the dutiful wives and mothers of popular imagination. They were vibrant, dynamic figures who navigated a world that both limited and relied on them. As you prepare for the evening's obligations and opportunities, remember that the story of Roman women is far from over. There's still much more to uncover, and trust me, it's going to be one heck of a ride. Stay tuned, because this saga of power, privilege, and perseverance is just getting warmed up. As the Roman sun dips below the horizon, casting an amber glow over tiled roofs and marble columns, the stage is set for a different kind of Roman drama, one that's less about gladiators and more about the intellectual duel. Yes, folks, it's time to explore how Roman women contributed to culture and literature, wielding pens as deftly as they managed social gatherings. Let's start with Hortensia, a name that doesn't quite roll off the tongue like Caesar or Cicero, but trust me, she's not to be overlooked. Picture this, it's 42 BC, and Rome is in turmoil again. The second triumvirate, the VIP club of Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, decides to tax rich Roman women to fund their military campaigns. Enter Hortensia, daughter of the famed orator Quintus Hortensius. She's had enough of this nonsense. In a move that would make any modern activist proud, Hortensia takes her complaints straight to the triumvirate. Standing in the forum, she delivers a speech so compelling that it shames these power-hungry men into reducing the tax. A woman publicly speaking in the forum, that's about as scandalous as it gets in ancient Rome. Hortensia's speech wasn't just about taxes. It was a bold assertion of women's rights and influence. It's one of those, drop the scroll, moments that's both legendary and a testament to female agency in a male-dominated world. Now, let's turn the spotlight on Agrippina the Younger. If you thought your family had issues, wait until you hear about hers. Agrippina was a power broker par excellence, a woman who knew how to play the Roman political game like she was born with a strategy guide. She was the sister of Emperor Caligula, wife of Emperor Claudius, and mother of Emperor Nero. Talk about connections. Agrippina's reputation swings between the poles of being a Machiavellian puppet master and a ruthless mother. Was she the ultimate stage mom, or did she genuinely believe in her son Nero's potential? Historical accounts are murky, often written by those who saw her as a threat. But let's give credit where it's due. Agrippina navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics with a cunning that would rival any of her male counterparts. She was a patron of the arts, supporting writers and philosophers, and ensuring that her son received an education that drilled both rhetoric and philosophy into his imperial skull. Speaking of education, let's tackle the myth that Roman women were illiterate, sitting in the atrium twiddling their thumbs. In reality, Roman women's literacy was more widespread than the toga-clad historians would have us believe. The truth is, many Roman women from the upper echelons of society were educated, fluent in Greek and Latin. They read and wrote letters on wax tablets and papyrus, leaving behind fragments that tantalize modern historians. Take Sulpicia, for instance. She's one of the few female poets from ancient Rome whose work has survived. Her poetry, though scant, offers a glimpse into the personal and emotional lives of Roman women, counteracting the stereotype that they were merely decorative fixtures in marble-clad villas. Sulpicia's verses reveal a woman unafraid to express desire and individuality, challenging the notion that Roman women were mere vessels for producing heirs. And then there's Julia Balbilla, a poet who accompanied Emperor Hadrian and his wife Sabina to Egypt. Her poetry, inscribed on the Colossus of Memnon, shows a mastery of language and a flair for mythological allusion. Her work stands as a testament to the intellectual pursuits available to women of status who dared to defy societal expectations. The education of Roman women wasn't just about reading and writing. It was also about understanding the cultural and philosophical currents of the time. Women engaged with the works of Homer, Virgil, and Ovid, not just as passive consumers, but as active interpreters and critics. They participated in literary salons and philosophical discussions, spaces that, while dominated by men, were not wholly exclusive. These gatherings were the ancient version of a TED talk, with intellectual sparring and the exchange of ideas. Yet, let's not get swept away by romanticized notions. The reality was that access to education and cultural pursuits was predominantly a privilege of the wealthy. For every educated Sulpicia, there were countless women whose lives revolved around the domestic sphere, with little access to books or philosophical debates. The disparity in literacy and education reflects the broader social and economic divides of Roman society. But even within these constraints, women found ways to leave their mark on cultural life. They commissioned artworks, supported playwrights, and hosted gatherings that were crucibles of intellectual and artistic exchange. Women like Cornelia, the mother of the Gracchi brothers, were celebrated not just as mothers, but as cultivators of Roman culture and intellect. Her letters, though only surviving in references, were reputed to be eloquent and insightful, offering advice that shaped the political careers of her sons. So, as the evening deepens and the stars begin to twinkle over the eternal city, the contributions of Roman women to culture and literature remind us that history is not just the story of famous men in togas. It's a tapestry woven with the threads of countless women who, through resilience and intellect, carved out spaces for themselves in a world that often sought to silence them. The legend of Roman women is both one of struggle and triumph, a testament to the enduring human spirit in the face of societal constraints. Stay tuned, because this deep dive into the lives of Roman women is far from over. We've tackled the cultural sphere, but there's more to uncover in the ever-twisting saga of power, legacy, and survival in ancient Rome. Grab your laurel wreaths and prepare for the next chapter, because this story is just catching its stride. As we wrap up our whirlwind tour through the lives of Roman women, let's settle in for a moment of reflection. It's easy to get swept up in the grandeur of Rome, the marble columns, the Senate debates, the gladiatorial games. But beneath that polished veneer lies a more nuanced reality. The lives of Roman women, far from the oversimplified portrayals of passive matrons and demure maidens, were a complex dance of power, influence, and resilience. First, let's address the myths head-on. The romanticized image of the Roman woman, forever cloaked in virtue and silence, is about as accurate as a toga made of polyester. Sure, literature often paints them as paragons of modesty and fidelity, but reality was a little less Instagram perfect. Women like Livia Drusilla and Agrippina, the younger, didn't just stand in the shadow of their husbands and sons. They orchestrated political machinations that rivaled any Senate debate. Through strategic marriages, they wielded influence that was both subtle and substantial, a testament to their agency in a society that officially barred them from power. And then there's the economic aspect. While the image of the Roman woman reclining in leisure might appeal to our sense of ancient glamour, the truth is they were more akin to modern-day CFOs of their households. A Roman matron was responsible for managing the household finances, a role that required a keen understanding of the economy. Consider this. A wealthy Roman household might spend upwards of 200,000 sesterces a year just on food and entertainment. That's equivalent to the annual salary of several Roman soldiers. Women had to be sharp, making fiscal decisions that could make or break the family fortune. Let's not forget the social and cultural contributions. Despite the lack of formal political power, women were the unsung architects of Roman culture. Hortensia, with her audacious speech against the triumvirate, proved that women could influence public discourse. Then there's Sulpicia, whose poetry tore through the constraints of societal expectation to give voice to the personal and the passionate. These women remind us that history isn't just the story of men in togas. It's a tapestry woven with the threads of countless women who defied the status quo. The legal landscape was another arena where myth and reality diverged. The notion of manus, where a woman's legal identity was transferred from father to husband, paints a picture of helplessness. But look closer, and you'll see women navigating these constraints with the dexterity of a chess grandmaster. They used their influence to manage property, negotiate dowries, and advocate for their children, all while contending with a legal system that was about as consistent as the Tiber River in flood season. In the religious sphere, women were more than just passive participants. The Vestal Virgins, with their sacred duty to maintain the eternal flame, held a position of respect and influence. Their role wasn't just ceremonial, it was a linchpin of Roman religious life. And let's not overlook the festival of Bona Dea, prime example of women carving out exclusive spaces for themselves in a male-dominated society. These events were more than just social gatherings. They were venues for building alliances and exerting influence. So, what's the takeaway from our day with the Roman women? It's a lesson in complexity and contradiction. They were expected to embody ideals of virtue and domesticity, yet their reality demanded they be shrewd, strategic, and resilient. They were both indispensable and invisible, wielding influence behind the scenes while the spotlight focused on their male counterparts. Their lives were a balancing act between societal expectations and personal agency, a dance as intricate as any performed in the theaters of Rome. And as we step back from the ancient cobblestones and look at modern gender dynamics, the parallels are hard to ignore. The struggle for recognition, the balance between public and private roles, and the negotiation of power within constraints are themes that resonate even today. The story of Roman women is not just a historical footnote. It's a reminder of the enduring human spirit and the relentless pursuit of agency in the face of adversity. In closing, let's leave behind the marble halls of ancient Rome with a newfound appreciation for the women who navigated its complexities. Their stories are not just tales of survival. They're chronicles of ingenuity, resilience, and influence. So next time you hear the myth of the passive Roman matron, remember the Hortensias and Agrippinas who defied convention, the Sulpicias who penned their truths, and the countless women who, through quiet strength, shaped the course of history. Because in the grand tapestry of time, their threads are woven as brightly as any emperor's. If the tale of Charlemagne were a TV series, it'd be one heck of a drama. Think Game of Thrones, but with more wool and less dragons. Our leading man, Charlemagne, or Charles the Great if you're feeling formal, was born around 742 AD. Now, historical records are a bit fuzzy on the exact date because, let's face it, record-keeping in the 8th century was not exactly top-notch. But what we do know is that he was born into a family that was as tangled as a bowl of medieval spaghetti. Charlemagne was the son of Pepin the Short. Yes, Pepin the Short. Let's pause to appreciate medieval naming conventions. Pepin's height, or lack thereof, didn't stop him from being a big player in Frankish politics. He was crowned King of the Franks in 751 AD, thanks to a little help from Pope Zachary. So, Charlemagne was born with a crown practically dangling over his crib, even if it was a pretty odd-looking one. Now, family drama, you bet. Charlemagne had a brother named Charlemagne, and the two were like oil and water, assuming oil and water were medieval princes vying for power. When Pepin kicked the bucket in 768, he divided the kingdom between his two sons, because sharing a kingdom always works out so well. Charlemagne got the southern half, and Charlemagne got the north. It was like a medieval sitcom waiting to happen. The good times didn't last long. In a plot twist worthy of any soap opera, Charlemagne died suddenly in 771. Cause of death, mystery, but it conveniently left Charlemagne as the sole ruler of the Frankish kingdom. Some speculated foul play, but historians tend to agree that Charlemagne's sudden shuffling off this mortal coil was just one of those things that happened in a time when a cold could be your ticket to the afterlife. With a kingdom now united under one crown, Charlemagne was on a roll. But before we give him a standing ovation, let's talk politics. The Frankish kingdom was no paradise. It was a patchwork quilt of cultures, tribes, and languages held together by the thinnest of threads. Charlemagne's job was to stitch it into something resembling a coherent whole, and he did it with a needle and thread made of iron and blood. Enter the Saxons, a group of Germanic tribes who were about as agreeable as a cat in a bathtub. Charlemagne spent over 30 years trying to subdue them, starting around 772. It was less of a campaign and more of a long, drawn-out family feud. The Saxons were fiercely independent and not too keen on Charlemagne's brand of Christianization, which was delivered with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. His efforts to convert them were punctuated with the occasional massacre, like the infamous massacre of Verdun in 782, where 500 Saxons were reportedly executed. Not exactly a heartwarming conversion story. But Charlemagne wasn't just swinging swords. He was also quite the administrator. He reformed the legal system, standardized weights and measures, and even dabbled in education. He was like the medieval equivalent of a tech startup CEO, minus the hoodie. He gathered scholars at his court in Aachen, creating a little intellectual haven in the midst of the Dark Ages. The Carolingian Renaissance was born, and it was less about painting cherubs and more about making sure people could read the Bible without mangling the Latin. Now, let's talk about Charlemagne's crowning achievement, literally. On Christmas Day in 800 AD, Pope Leo Roman III crowned Charlemagne as the Emperor of the Romans. You might be picturing a grand ceremony with trumpets and fanfare, but it was more like an awkward surprise party. Charlemagne claimed he didn't know it was going to happen, which is either a testament to the Pope's stealth or a masterclass in humble bragging. Regardless, it was a big deal. The title was meant to revive the glory of the Roman Empire, but it was more like crowning Charlemagne the king of nostalgia. This coronation was a power move by the Pope as much as it was a win for Charlemagne. It signaled the Church's influence over the state, a dynamic that would play out in European politics for centuries. Charlemagne's empire was vast, stretching from what is now France to parts of Italy and Germany. It was Europe's greatest hits album, with Charlemagne conducting the orchestra. But let's not get carried away. The empire was shiny and new on the outside, but inside it was a bureaucratic nightmare. Charlemagne was constantly on the move, covering territory like a medieval road warrior, trying to keep the whole operation from falling apart. His reign was less about ruling from a throne and more about managing a very large, very unruly classroom. In the end, Charlemagne's legacy is a mixed bag. He was a brutal conqueror and a forward-thinking reformer. He spread Christianity by the sword, but also fostered a cultural revival. He was the father of Europe, but his empire didn't last much longer than he did. After his death in 814, it splintered under his grandson's rule, proving that even the best-laid plans of emperors and kings often go awry. So, Charlemagne, with his not-so-humble beginnings and his patchwork empire, remains a towering figure in European history. He was a man of contradictions who wielded power like a double-edged sword. His life was a medieval epic full of battles, betrayals, and the occasional educational reform, a legend in his own time and ours, though probably without the dragons. Charlemagne's story is just getting warmed up. With his empire sprawling like a medieval real estate mogul's dream, he faced the Herculean task of transforming this land of chaos into something resembling order. And when I say order, I mean the kind that involves a lot of trial and error, some of which would make even the most optimistic reformer cringe. Let's start with education, or Charlemagne's version of No Child Left Behind, circa 8th century. Picture a world where literacy was about as common as a unicorn siding. Charlemagne, however, was not content with a kingdom full of illiterates. He wanted his subjects to be able to read the Bible, not just stare at it like it was an alien artifact. So, he ushered in what historians like to call the Carolingian Renaissance. Sounds grand, right? But before you imagine Renaissance fairs with jousting and turkey legs, this was more about monks scribbling away in scriptoria. Under Charlemagne's orders, schools were attached to monasteries and cathedrals. He brought in scholars from all corners of the known world, with Alcuin of York, a guy who could do long division in his sleep, leading the charge. The curriculum mainly focused on religious texts, but it also included the trivium and quadrivium. That's fancy speak for grammar, rhetoric, logic, arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Basically, the medieval version of a liberal arts education minus the student loans. But let's not kid ourselves. Charlemagne wasn't just a bookworm in a crown. His educational reforms were less about personal enlightenment and more about creating a unified Christian empire where everyone was on the same page. Literally, books were copied in a standardized script, Carolingian minuscule, which made Latin easier to read. Goodbye, medieval chicken scratch. Hello, legibility. This might seem trivial, but it was a game changer. Imagine trying to run a kingdom when your subjects can't even agree on how to spell king. Now, let's shift gears to Charlemagne's attempts at creating a unified code of law. The man was nothing if not ambitious. Charlemagne wanted laws that applied from the Pyrenees to the Elbe, which sounds reasonable until you remember that his empire was a cultural patchwork quilt. His solution, the capitularies, essentially royal decrees on everything from church attendance to the proper way to brew beer. Spoiler alert, not everyone was a fan of these newfound regulations. The funny thing is, these laws were often enforced with the kind of consistency you'd expect from a toddler's bedtime routine. Some regions followed them to the letter, while others treated them like mere suggestions. It was less rule of law and more rule of we'll see. But you can't accuse Charlemagne of not trying. He even appointed missi dominici, royal agents who travelled around the empire to ensure these laws were obeyed. Sort of like medieval auditors, but with swords. Speaking of swords, let's talk about Charlemagne's religious reforms, because nothing says Holy Empire quite like a few well-placed battles. Charlemagne was a devout Christian, or as devout as one could be while simultaneously conquering half of Europe. His Saxon campaigns are legendary, though perhaps not for the reasons you'd want in a bedtime story. The Saxons were the stubborn kind, clinging to their pagan beliefs like a dog to a bone. Charlemagne's response: convert or die, and sometimes just die. The massacre of Verdun in 782 is a grim reminder of this approach, where thousands of Saxons met their end for refusing baptism. It's the kind of tale that gets left out of the holiday card summary of his reign. Despite the bloodshed, Charlemagne's religious policy was more than just fire and brimstone. He was genuinely invested in the moral and spiritual welfare of his people. He convened synods, which were basically church councils, to tackle issues of faith and practice. He even wrote letters to bishops, urging them to preach properly. It was like an 8th century TED talk on how to run a church. Cultural reforms. Charlemagne had those on his list too. He recognized the power of art and architecture in unifying his empire. He commissioned the construction of grand churches and palaces, like his own in Aachen, which was a marvel of Carolingian architecture. Think of it as Versailles, but with more stone and less opulence. But cultural reform was a double-edged sword. Charlemagne's push for uniformity often clashed with the rich diversity of local traditions. While he aimed to civilize his empire, many saw it as an erasure of their identity. It's a tale as old as time. One man's progress is another's oppression. And so, Charlemagne's domestic policies were a mixed bag of triumphs and tribulations. He managed to plant the seeds of change in a world resistant to it, paving the way for future European development. Yet, his reign was not without its ironies. The man who sought to bring unity often found himself entangled in the very complexities he tried to simplify. As we march onward in this medieval saga, Charlemagne's legacy remains a testament to the complexities of power, faith, and culture. It was a world where the lines between sword and scepter blurred, and where the pursuit of order often led to chaos. But that's a story for another day, as we delve deeper into the life and times of the father of Europe. Charlemagne's story wasn't all swords and sermons, though. The man had a diplomatic side that would put today's politicos to shame. Picture a medieval chessboard, each kingdom a piece in Charlemagne's grand game of thrones. And what better way to keep those pieces in check than with a bit of charm and the occasional exotic animal? Enter the Abbasid Caliphate, a powerhouse of the Islamic world, stretching across the Middle East with the kind of influence that made European rulers sit up and take notice. Charlemagne and Caliph Harun al-Rashid, of Arabian Nights fame, struck up a relationship that was the medieval equivalent of sliding into each other's DMs. They exchanged letters and gifts, each one more flamboyant than the last, like two rival influencers trying to outdo each other with expensive swag. And what gifts they were. In 802, Charlemagne received an elephant named a Balabas, courtesy of the Caliph. Now, an elephant in Europe was about as common as a snowstorm in the Sahara. balabas became a living symbol of the diplomatic ties between the Frankish and Abbasid empires, a hefty reminder that Charlemagne was playing the long game. The elephant made quite the splash, literally, when it reportedly swam across the Rhine River, talk about making an entrance. But these gifts weren't just for show. They were the ancient equivalent of a handshake agreement, a way to secure peaceful relations and open trade routes. The silk and spices from the east were the medieval iPhones and Teslas, coveted and rare. By securing ties with the Abbasids, Charlemagne was ensuring that his empire had access to these treasures. It was diplomacy, yes, but also a savvy business move. After all, Charlemagne's empire didn't just run on faith and swords. It needed cold, hard cash, or at least as close as you could get to it in the 9th century. Yet, Charlemagne's foreign policy wasn't all about the exotic and the extraordinary. His diplomatic acumen extended to more traditional means, like marriages. These alliances were less about romance and more about consolidating power, ensuring that neighboring kingdoms were more family reunion than battlefield. Charlemagne arranged marriages for his family like a chess master, positioning his pawns, each union designed to keep potential rivals close and alliances even closer. His daughters, for example, were married off to Lombard and Bavarian nobles, weaving a web of alliances that spanned the continent. And while modern sensibilities might cringe at the idea of marriage being used as political currency, in Charlemagne's time, it was the norm. Love and marriage may have gone together like a horse and carriage, but in politics it was more like a horse and a chariot, practical, powerful, and sometimes a bit bumpy. Of course, not all of Charlemagne's alliances were sealed with a wedding ring. He also relied on a network of vassals. These were local lords who swore fealty to him in exchange for protection and land. It was a delicate balance of power, a bit like trying to herd cats with promises of more catnip. The vassals got to keep their lands and titles, while Charlemagne got to keep his empire intact. This system of fealty was less about loyalty and more about mutual benefit, an understanding that everyone had a stake in keeping the empire from crumbling like a stale croissant. Charlemagne's empire was a marvel, held together by a tapestry of agreements, marriages, and occasional pachyderms. It was a masterclass in medieval statecraft, a precarious dance on the edge of chaos. Yet beneath the grandeur and the glory lay the simple truth. This empire was sustained as much by goodwill as by governance. The glue that held it together was often more hope than hard power, more diplomacy than dictatorship. But let's not get too misty-eyed. Charlemagne was no saint, and his diplomacy was occasionally backed by the pointed end of a sword. For every peaceful treaty, there was a military campaign ready to enforce it. His empire was as much a product of conquest as it was of cunning, a patchwork quilt stitched together with both blood and ink. As we delve deeper into Charlemagne's legacy, we're reminded of the dual nature of his reign. He was a diplomat and a warrior, a ruler who knew when to extend the olive branch and when to wield the sword. His empire, vast and varied, was a testament to his ability to navigate the turbulent waters of medieval politics. Yet, like all empires, it was built on the shifting sands of power and ambition, a reminder that even the mightiest of rulers must eventually face the tide of change. And so, the saga of Charlemagne continues, a tale of elephants, alliances, and the ceaseless quest for unity in a world forever teetering on the brink of discord. The father of Europe, indeed, but perhaps more accurately, the juggler of empires, ever striving to keep his kingdom aloft in the swirling winds of history. Now, let's dive into the tail end of Charlemagne's reign, a time when the empire's tapestry started to fray at the edges, and the familial drama cranked up to a level that would make a Shakespearean tragedy look like a sitcom. As the father of Europe aged, he faced the Herculean task of succession, a medieval game of musical chairs where the stakes were a crown, not a seat. Charlemagne had a brood of sons, each with ambitions as grand as their father's empire, and a penchant for causing headaches that would make aspirin a bestseller. His eldest, Charles the Younger, was the golden child, groomed from a young age to inherit the lion's share of his father's dominion. Then there was Pippin, named after his grandfather, Pepin the Short. Clearly, the family had a fondness for recycling names. And finally, Louis, the youngest, who was more interested in prayer than power, not exactly ideal emperor material in a world where might often made right. By the late 790s, Charlemagne had divvied up his empire like a king-sized pie, hoping to keep his son's content and prevent any sibling squabbles from turning into full-blown civil wars. Charles the Younger was slated to get the Frankish heartland. Pippin was handed Italy, where he could play Caesar in the sun, and Louis received Aquitaine, a lush region perfect for pondering the divine or engaging in a little light governance. But here's the kicker. Charlemagne's grand plan for a peaceful transition was about as stable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. While he might have hoped his sons would govern harmoniously, the reality was more like a medieval soap opera, complete with power struggles, betrayals, and enough drama to fuel a month's worth of tabloid headlines. Take Pippin, for instance. Despite his Italian gig, he had a rebellious streak that made him more than a little restless. In 792, he even got tangled up in a conspiracy against his own father, a plot that was squashed faster than a grape at a wine festival. Charlemagne, ever the doting yet firm patriarch, forgave him, though the incident surely added a few more grey hairs to his royal mane. Meanwhile, Charles the Younger was busy proving that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, engaging in military campaigns that would make his old man proud. His exploits in Saxony and against the Avars were the stuff of legends, or at least the kind of tales that would keep a court scribe busy. Yet fate played a cruel hand. In 811, Charles the Younger died unexpectedly, leaving Charlemagne bereft and scrambling to revise his succession plans like a medieval CEO, updating his business strategy after a market crash. With Charles the Younger out of the picture, the spotlight fell on Louis, the pious Prince of Aquitaine, who suddenly found himself holding the keys to the empire. In 813, Charlemagne crowned Louis as co-emperor, a move that was equal parts strategy and desperation. It was a last-ditch effort to ensure a seamless transfer of power, but it was like handing the wheel of a ship to a sailor who preferred the serenity of the stars to the chaos of the sea. And let's not forget the empire itself, a behemoth held together by Charlemagne's sheer will and the occasional application of force. As he aged, the cracks began to show. Governance became a juggling act, with Charlemagne racing from one crisis to the next like a medieval firefighter, dousing flames of rebellion and discontent. The empire's vastness, once a testament to his power, was now a logistical nightmare that even the most efficient of missi dominici struggled to manage. Economically, Charlemagne's empire was a mixed bag of riches and rags. While trade routes flourished, bringing in exotic goods that dazzled the court, the agrarian backbone of the empire was less glamorous. The economy was as stable as a wooden cart on a bumpy road, with peasants toiling under the weight of heavy taxes and the occasional famine knocking on the door like an unwelcome guest. In his twilight years, Charlemagne also faced the daunting task of maintaining religious unity. His efforts to Christianize his domains had been relentless, but the spiritual landscape was as diverse and unruly as the political one. Pagan practices lingered like stubborn stains, and heretical movements popped up like weeds, each one a challenge to the emperor's vision of a unified Christendom. It was a battle of faith as much as force, and Charlemagne, ever the devout ruler, was determined to leave a spiritual legacy as enduring as his political one. Yet, despite the chaos and the cracks, Charlemagne remained a figure of awe and admiration. His court at Aachen was a beacon of culture and learning, a bright spot in an age often painted with the broad brushstrokes of darkness. The Carolingian Renaissance, with its libraries and scholars, continued to flourish, a testament to Charlemagne's belief in the power of knowledge to uplift and unify. In January of 814, Charlemagne's reign came to an end. The great emperor passed away at the age of 66, a ripe old age in an era where reaching 40 was considered an achievement. His death marked the end of an era, the final curtain on a life that had been both glorious and grim. Louis the Pious, the son once thought least likely to wear the crown, was now the sole ruler left to navigate the turbulent waters of an empire built on both conquest and compromise. And there we have it, Charlemagne, the father of Europe, a man of contradictions, whose legacy was as vast and varied as the lands he ruled. As we prepare to explore the aftermath of his reign, we're reminded of the timeless truth that empires, like their architects, are only as enduring as the foundations upon which they stand. So stay tuned as we delve into the next chapter of this epic saga, where the echoes of Charlemagne's reign continue to reverberate through the corridors of history. Charlemagne's passing was not just the end of a reign. It was like losing the linchpin in a medieval game of Jenga. And as we dig through the annals of history, it's clear that while his empire may have crumbled faster than a cookie under a toddler's grip, his legacy was just getting started. Charlemagne, the man with a foot in both the brutal realm of conquest and the world of intellectual renaissance, became a mythic figure who would haunt Europe's imagination for centuries. Now, let's be honest. History has a way of turning heroes into legends and legends into myths, with all the embellishments of a Hollywood blockbuster. Charlemagne's life was no exception. Over the centuries, he was romanticized into the quintessential medieval superhero, with tales of his exploits making it to the pages of epic poetry and Chanson's Digest, those medieval rap battles where bards would sing of knights and their daring deeds. Charlemagne was painted as the ideal Christian king, a warrior of God who spread the gospel with one hand and wielded a sword with the other. It's a narrative that's as appealing as it is simplistic, glossing over the grittier bits. Take the Song of Roland, for instance. This classic piece of medieval literature casts Charlemagne as a wise and noble emperor, leading his knights against the Saracens in Spain. It's a heroic tale that's about as historically accurate as a tabloid headline. But hey, who doesn't love a good underdog story? In reality, the Battle of Roncesvalles Pass in 778, which inspired the poem, was less a grand clash of civilizations and more a botched retreat where Charlemagne's rearguard got ambushed by local Basque forces. Not exactly the stuff of legend, but history loves a good rewrite. As time marched on, Charlemagne's legend grew, and so did the myths surrounding him. By the Middle Ages, he was canonized as a saint in some parts of Europe, despite the Vatican never officially recognizing him. The allure of Charlemagne, the saintly monarch, was too strong to resist, even if his methods were occasionally more Old Testament than New. His image was polished to a gleaming shine, erasing the bloodstains of Verdun and the realpolitik of his reign. But it's not just the poets and hagiographers who shaped Charlemagne's legacy. Politicians got in on the action too. Fast forward to the 19th century, and you'll find Napoleon Bonaparte, the pint-sized powerhouse himself, channeling Charlemagne's spirit. Here was a man who understood the power of myth, using Charlemagne's legacy to legitimize his own ambitions of European conquest. Napoleon even styled himself as a successor to Charlemagne, with a coronation ceremony in 1804 that echoed Charlemagne's own in 800 AD. It was the ultimate power move, a nod to the past, as he attempted to cement his future. Even today, Charlemagne's shadow looms large over Europe. He's been dubbed the Father of Europe, a title that captures both the grandeur and the complexity of his legacy. On one hand, you have the romantic notion of a ruler who united disparate territories under a single banner, a proto-European union, if you will. On the other hand, there's the reality of a fragmented empire held together by force and a fragile system of vassalage. It's a duality that speaks to the heart of Europe's own identity crisis, the struggle between unity and division, cultural diversity and political cohesion. And let's not forget the economic context. Charlemagne's reign saw the revival of trade and the standardization of currency, with the silver denier becoming the euro of its day, facilitating commerce across his vast empire. It was an economic renaissance that laid the groundwork for the European economy, even if the empire itself didn't survive to see the fruits of this labor. So, what does Charlemagne's story tell us about power, myth-making, and the peculiar ways history remembers its heroes? For starters, it underscores the allure of a good story, how a narrative can transcend the messy truths of the past to become a beacon for future generations. Charlemagne's myth is a reminder that history is as much about the tales we choose to tell as it is about the facts we can verify. But it also highlights the dangers of romanticizing the past. Charlemagne was a man of his time, a ruler who operated within the brutal realities of medieval life. His legacy, while impressive, is a mosaic of contradictions. A champion of education who couldn't write, a unifier who left a divided empire, a saintly figure with a penchant for conquest. To understand Charlemagne is to embrace these contradictions, to see the man behind the myth. In the end, Charlemagne's legacy is a cautionary tale about the power of myth and the complexities of leadership. It's a story that resonates today as Europe grapples with its own identity, a continent caught between the pull of unity and the push of nationalism. Charlemagne's life and reign remind us that history is not just about the past. It's a conversation with the present, a dialogue between what was and what could be. So as we wrap up this saga of swords, scholars, and the occasional elephant, let's raise a metaphorical goblet to Charlemagne, a ruler who, for better or worse, left an indelible mark on the tapestry of history. The father of Europe may be gone, but his legacy lives on, a testament to the enduring power of myth and the complex dance of history. Cheers to that, and may we continue to learn from the echoes of the past as we forge our own path into the future. In the dim light of a Scandinavian dawn, a Viking preparing for a raid was less like a scene from a Hollywood blockbuster and more akin to a Norse version of the office. Sure, there might have been the occasional awe-inspiring beard, but let's be honest, many of these guys were just trying to get the logistics right before setting sail. Forget the romanticized vision of wild-eyed barbarians. These folks were more like meticulous strategists with a penchant for adventure and occasionally a bit of chaos. Before the longships even touched water, there was a flurry of activities that might remind you more of prepping for a corporate retreat than a high-seas adventure. First, there was the matter of the longship itself, a masterpiece of engineering that would make even the most ardent IKEA fan weep with pride. These ships, like the famous Garkstad ship, measured about 23 meters long and could carry up to 32 warriors. The craftsmanship was so precise that these vessels could navigate both open seas and narrow rivers with ease. Talk about multifunctional. As the Vikings gathered, the air crackled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. You could almost hear the collective groans as they checked off their to-do lists. Supplies, check. Weapons, double check. Witty battle taunts, always essential. The logistics manager, or the Viking equivalent, probably had a mental spreadsheet. No Excel in the 9th century, sadly, to ensure everything was in order. This wasn't just about raw power. It was about smart planning and a keen sense of timing. After all, the best loot was often found where you least expected it, and the early Viking got the gold. Now, let's talk about those beards, or lack thereof. While pop culture loves to depict every Viking as a burly figure with a beard that could rival Santa's, historical evidence suggests otherwise. Sure, some sported impressive facial hair, but others preferred a cleaner look. Perhaps they were going for aerodynamic efficiency. Who knows? What's certain is that their grooming choices didn't hinder their ability to plan a raid. The strategic discussions were perhaps the most crucial part of the preparations. Forget the idea of a haphazard charge into battle. These were calculated decisions, often involving communal discussions where everyone had a say. Imagine a group meeting with a bunch of Norsemen debating the best route to take or which monastery to target next. Democracy in action, Viking style. But why all this fuss for a raid? For the Vikings, it was all about the loot, not just the plunder. Wealth was the key to power and influence. Gold, silver, and other valuables weren't just shiny baubles. They were the currency of status and survival. The more a Viking could bring back, the higher their standing in the community. Think of it as a stock market, but with a bit more swordplay and fewer spreadsheets. It's also worth noting that not every Viking was in it for the violence. Some saw raiding as a means to an end, a way to secure land and resources in a time when the Scandinavian homeland could be unforgiving. Harsh winters and limited farming land meant that resources were scarce, and venturing out was often a necessity rather than a choice. So, while the romantic image of bloodthirsty warriors has its appeal, the reality was often more complex and driven by necessity. As they prepared to set sail, the anticipation was palpable. The longships, ready to glide through water with the grace of a swan, were a testament to the Vikings' ingenuity and determination. These vessels would carry them to foreign shores, where opportunity and danger awaited. The promise of riches, glory, and the thrill of adventure was enough to fuel their journey, even if it sometimes meant leaving behind the comforts of home. So, the next time you hear tales of Viking raids, remember that behind the legendary exploits were real people with real motivations. They weren't just marauders. They were adventurers, strategists, and yes, even logistics managers. And as they embarked on their expeditions, it carried with them the hopes of returning not just as conquerors, but as heroes in their own right. As the longships slipped away from the shore, the reality of cramped quarters hit like a winter gale. If you've ever been on a budget airline, you know the drill. Elbow to elbow, knees up to your chin, and praying the guy next to you isn't a chatterbox. Now, imagine doing that with your closest 31 warrior buddies, minus the in-flight peanuts. The longships were engineering marvels, sure, but comfort wasn't exactly in the brochure. The Vikings had to pack themselves in like sardines, each warrior bringing not just their battle axe, but their own personal space issues. But despite the sardine-can conditions, these ships were the medieval equivalent of a GPS. Forget about compasses and technology. The Vikings had something even better: the sun, stars, and a surprising knack for reading the sea. Navigational skills were more valuable than the finest loot. Their secret weapon, the sun compass. By calculating the sun's position using a wooden dial, they could determine their direction with a precision that would make modern navigators weep. And when the skies were as moody as a teenager, they relied on another trick, the sunstone. This magical piece of Icelandic spar could polarize light, allowing them to find the sun's direction even on cloudy days. Forget Hogwarts. These guys had real magic at sea. While the idea of a long sea voyage might conjure up images of sallow faces and lemons, these Vikings managed to dodge the scurvy bullet with surprising efficiency. Unlike later seafarers who didn't quite get the memo about vitamin C, the Vikings had a diet that kept them surprisingly healthy. They packed plenty of dried fish, grains, and even pickled vegetables, which helped stave off the dreaded scurvy. It's like they had an ancient version of a nutritionist on board, minus the kale smoothies. Now, let's debunk another myth: the idea of Vikings as brute force barbarians who relied solely on muscle to win the day. In reality, a Viking raid was more about timing than testosterone. Sure, having a brawny physique helped, but so did having a brain that could outsmart an opponent. These raids were often meticulously timed to coincide with seasonal events, like harvests or religious festivals, when villages were least prepared for an attack. It was less about the brawn and more about the brains, and maybe a touch of opportunism. Of course, all this planning didn't mean the Vikings were immune to the whims of Viking weather, which is a euphemism for wet and miserable. Imagine setting sail under a sky darker than a blacksmith's apron, rain pelting down like accusations at a witch trial. The North Sea wasn't known for its hospitality, and those legendary longships could be tossed around like leaves in a storm. It took nerves of steel, and perhaps a few Norse prayers, to brave those waters. But the Vikings were nothing if not resilient, their spirits as unyielding as their homeland's rocky coastlines. So, as the sea spray whipped across their faces, and the horizon beckoned with the promise of adventure, and maybe a bit of plunder, the Vikings pressed on. Each stroke of the oar was a step closer to their destination, each wave a reminder of both the peril and promise of the sea. It was a journey not just across waters, but into the annals of history, where they would be remembered not just as marauders, but as masters of the sea, navigators of the unknown, and strategists of their time. As the longships cut through the water with the grace of a swan, albeit a very crowded swan, the Vikings' minds were set on the lands they would soon reach. Lands where they hoped to find riches and resources, where they might carve out a new life, or simply return home with tales of adventure and pockets full of treasure. In these moments, the cramped quarters and the biting winds were just the price of admission to the theatre of history, where they would play their part as both villains and heroes, depending on who was writing the script. Arriving at the shores of their target was a bit like a high-stakes game of hide and seek, with more axes and less hiding. As the longships glided silently toward land, the Vikings prepared to make their presence known in a fashion that was as subtle as a Norse thunderstorm. The so-called greeting wasn't about exchanging pleasantries over a cup of mead. Instead, it was a coordinated display of swords and strategy, where timing and surprise were the real MVPs. Picture a flash mob, but instead of breaking into dance, they broke into villages. Now, let's talk strategy. The Vikings were not just a bunch of burly guys with sharp objects. They were master tacticians. Landing sites were chosen with precision, often near river mouths that offered easy access for a quick getaway if things went south. The raiders moved swiftly, knowing that the element of surprise was their best ally. While Hollywood might have you believe they charged in with all the subtlety of a rock concert, the reality was a blend of stealth and speed. They struck at dawn, when the world was still rubbing sleep from its eyes, turning the quiet of morning into chaos. But why all this effort for a raid? You see, the economics of raiding were a bit like investing in a startup. High risk, but with the potential for a hefty return. Crossing the North Sea wasn't a cheap weekend getaway. It took resources to build and maintain those magnificent longships, not to mention feeding a crew that could rival the hungriest of armies. But the payoff? Now, that could be substantial. Monasteries, in particular, were like the medieval version of a jackpot, holding treasures of gold, silver, and precious manuscripts. Why monasteries, you ask? Well, they were often poorly defended but rich in resources, making them prime targets for those looking to maximize their ROI, raid on investment. However, not every Viking raid ended with overflowing treasure chests. Sometimes you rolled the dice and ended up with little more than tales of daring and a few bruises. Despite their fearsome reputation, even the Vikings had off days. Imagine the disappointment of returning home after months at sea with no more than a sunburn and tales of what could have been. It was a reality check that not all that glitters is gold or even silver. Yet the allure of raiding persisted, driven by both necessity and the promise of adventure. For many Vikings, the raid was more than just a means to an end. It was a chance to carve their names into history, to return home not just with loot, but with stories that would echo through the long winter nights. And while the romantic image of the Viking warrior remains etched in our minds, it's worth remembering that behind the legend were real people, navigating the rough seas of both ocean and life. So, as the dust settled, and the longships slipped back into the water, carrying the spoils of victory or the lessons of defeat, the Vikings set their sights on the horizon. Each raid was a chapter in a larger story, one that would continue to unfold with new challenges and opportunities. And while the world remembers them as marauders, adventurers, and perhaps even villains, they were also strategists and survivors, navigating a world as unpredictable as the sea itself. As the longships glided away from the scene of their latest escapade, the Vikings faced the less glamorous side of raiding, the post-raid debrief. Imagine a medieval accounting session, but with fewer spreadsheets and more axes leaning against the wall. After all, dividing the loot wasn't just a matter of splitting coins. It was about maintaining harmony among a group of men who had spent way too much time in each other's personal space. The process was as democratic as a Viking assembly could be. Everyone got a say, or at least a share, before the chieftain took his cut. The goods were typically divided according to rank and contribution, a system that ensured even the guy who rode the least straight line got something for his trouble. Now, let's blow the horn on the myth of the berserker, those supposed shirtless, frothing warriors who fought in a trance-like fury. While they make for great drama, historical evidence suggests these frenzied figures were more the exception than the rule. It turns out, most Vikings preferred keeping their wits about them when their life was on the line. The idea of going into battle half-naked and unprotected was as appealing as a winter swim in the North Sea. Sure, there might have been a few adrenaline junkies who liked to fight in a frenzy, but the average Norse warrior was more about strategy than spectacle. They knew that keeping your cool and your chainmail on was often the best way to walk away from a scrap in one piece. Once the numbers were crunched and the treasure divvied up, the Vikings faced a curious byproduct of their exploits, the political and social ripple effects that followed them home. You see, the raids weren't just about short-term gains. They had long-lasting impacts that would shape the future in ways no one standing knee-deep in silver could have anticipated. The influx of wealth from these raids bolstered not just individual fortunes, but entire communities. Suddenly, a Viking chieftain with a knack for pillaging could elevate his status, consolidate power, and even attract followers eager to join in the next adventure. The spoils weren't just financial capital, they were social currency, paving the way for ambitious leaders to cement their legacies. And here's the kicker. Some of these Norsemen, after getting a taste of the world beyond their fjords, decided they quite liked it. The Vikings, those supposed fleeting shadows on European shores, began to settle down. They set roots in foreign lands, establishing trade routes and communities that would grow into cities and even kingdoms. It's like they stumbled onto the early version of Erbum and decided to stay indefinitely. Places like Dublin and Normandy owe their very existence to these erstwhile marauders who discovered that a stable home life had its perks. This settling down wasn't just a footnote in Viking history. It was a game changer. As they integrated into local populations, the Vikings brought with them their own customs, languages, and ideas, creating a cultural mashup that enriched both parties. The Norse influence spread far beyond their initial conquests, leaving an indelible mark on the linguistic, political, and cultural landscapes of Europe. Suddenly, the Vikings were not just the harbingers of chaos. They were agents of change, weaving themselves into the fabric of history in ways that would outlast even their most epic sagas. But let's not get too lost in the romance of it all. While the image of Vikings as settlers and founders of cities is appealing, the reality was often a bit messier. Establishing a new life in a foreign land came with its own set of challenges, from dealing with local resistance to figuring out how to grow crops in less than favorable climates. The Vikings had to adapt quickly, learning new skills and forging alliances with local powers. It was less about brute force and more about building relationships, sometimes through marriage, occasionally through force, and often through trade. You see, the economics of Viking settlement were as complex as their raids. They weren't just taking, they were also giving, contributing to the growth of trade networks across Europe. The Norsemen became traders, farmers, and craftsmen, integrating into local economies and helping to fuel the exchange of goods and ideas. From their Scandinavian homelands to the shores of Britain, Ireland, and beyond, the Vikings left a legacy of cultural exchange that would resonate for centuries. As we look back at these raiders turned settlers, it's clear that their story is one of evolution and adaptation. The Vikings weren't just marauders. They were opportunists in the best sense of the word, seizing on new possibilities and reshaping the world around them. They were not only masters of the sea, but of reinvention, proving that even the most feared warriors could find a new path when the winds of change blew. So, as the Vikings counted their spoils and contemplated their next moves, they were already laying the groundwork for a future that would see them not just as conquerors, but as creators of a new era. Their legacy, built on both plunder and progress, would echo through the halls of history, a testament to their cunning, courage, and adaptability. The Viking story was far from over, and as they looked to the horizon, they knew that the next chapter was theirs to write. As the Vikings gazed across the waves, charting the course for their next adventure, they were already leaving behind more than just footprints on foreign shores. Their legacy was a tapestry woven from the threads of conquest, commerce, and culture. These Norsemen, with their fierce reputation and undeniable ingenuity, were reshaping Europe in ways that would ripple through history. But let's not get swept away by romantic notions just yet. There's a gritty reality lurking behind those epic sagas. First off, let's tackle the horned helmet myth. Pop culture loves the image of a Viking with horns sprouting from their helmet like a medieval devil. But hold onto your helmets, history buffs, because there's no archaeological evidence to support this. The horned helmet is as real as a unicorn in a Norse saga. Sure, there are ceremonial helmets from other cultures, like the Celts, but for your average Viking raider, practicality trumps style. Who needs horns when you're trying to avoid getting your head bashed in during a melee? Now, let's talk about those raids. While they were often depicted as wild, chaotic affairs, they were more like highly organized military operations with a side of entrepreneurial flair. The Vikings weren't just swinging axes, they were swinging the economic pendulum of entire regions. Consider the infamous raid on Lindisfarne in 793 AD, a monastery off the coast of England. It wasn't just about plunder, it was about making a statement. This attack sent shockwaves across Europe, marking the beginning of the Viking Age and a new era of Norse influence. But the legacy of these raids wasn't just etched in blood and treasure. The Vikings, perhaps unintentionally, catalyzed economic and political shifts across Europe. Their raids destabilized regions, forcing local rulers to fortify defenses and rethink strategies. In essence, they were an unwelcome catalyst for change, prompting advancements in military and political infrastructure. It's like the medieval version of a wake-up call, delivered with an axe rather than a memo. As these Norse seafarers settled into new lands, they didn't just bring their swords, they brought their skills. The Viking influence is visible in the very fabric of European society, from the legal systems they helped inspire to the languages they enriched. Take the English language, for instance. Thanks to the Norse, we have words like berserk, ransack, and thrust, all of which paint quite the vivid picture of Viking priorities. And let's not forget the trade networks. The Vikings were the original globetrotters, establishing routes that stretched from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the bustling bazaars of Constantinople. They traded furs, amber, and slaves, while importing silk, spices, and silver, effectively becoming the middlemen of the medieval world. This exchange of goods wasn't just about commerce. It was about cultural exchange, weaving a diverse tapestry that connected disparate corners of the known world. Of course, the Viking legacy isn't all raids and riches. There's a softer side, one that often gets overshadowed by tales of pillage. Many Vikings who settled down had a knack for governance and agriculture, transforming barren lands into thriving communities. Look no further than the Danelaw in England, where Norse settlers implemented their own legal systems and agricultural practices, leaving a lasting imprint on the region. But why, you might ask, would these fearsome warriors ever want to swap their swords for plows? The answer lies in the harsh realities of their Scandinavian homelands. With limited arable land and harsh winters, settling down in more fertile territories offered a chance at stability and prosperity. For some Vikings, the prospect of a steady harvest and a cozy longhouse was more appealing than a lifetime of raiding. As the Viking age drew to a close, around the 11th century, these Norsemen had left an indelible mark on the world. They had shifted the balance of power, reshaped economies, and spread their culture far and wide. And while their fearsome reputation endures, it's important to remember that behind the legends were real people, navigating a complex world with both brutal force and remarkable adaptability. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, dreaming of longships and distant shores, remember that the Vikings were more than just marauders. They were innovators, settlers, and traders. They were the architects of their own legacy, carving their names into history with both sword and plough. And while the horned helmets might be a myth, the impact of these seafaring warriors is as real as the northern lights dancing across the Scandinavian sky. So, here's a tale that starts not with pyramids, pharaohs, or any of the usual Egyptian suspects, but with their lesser-known neighbors to the south, the kingdom of Kush. Imagine the Nile, that famous river, but let's head upstream, away from the Egyptian grandeur, and into something a bit more untold. We're talking about a civilization that was already bustling around 2500 BCE, long before anyone thought sand was a great canvas for triangular tombs. That's right, Kush was making pyramids before it became a Pinterest trend. Located in what is now Sudan, the kingdom of Kush thrived along the Nile's banks, that life-giving river that seems to have been the ancient world's version of a Starbucks, always nearby and essential for survival. The city of Kerma, the kingdom's heart around 2500 BCE, was not just a random speck in the desert. With its strategic location just south of the Egyptian border, it was where cultures clashed, goods exchanged, and let's face it, tensions brewed like a particularly spicy chai. Here's a fun twist. While everyone knows about the Egyptians and their fondness for building things that point to the sky, the Kushites were doing it too. And they did it with flair, long before it was cool or became a tourist photo op. These folks built over 200 pyramids, and while they might not be as colossal as the ones at Giza, they were just as significant. Who knew that Sudan could boast more pyramids than Egypt? Talk about an underdog story. But what makes the kingdom of Kush particularly fascinating is its dynamic role as both conqueror and conquered. They weren't just sitting back and watching the Egyptian show from the cheap seats. At times, they were in the director's chair, even taking a turn on the Egyptian throne. Yes, you heard right. The Kushites once ruled Egypt, not the other way around. This was a world where power ebbed and flowed like the Nile itself, and the Kushites were often right in the thick of it. Let's talk geography for a second, and I promise it won't be dull. Imagine a map. Kush was in a prime spot, like owning a waterfront condo with a view of the pyramids. They had a front row seat to one of the world's most legendary civilizations, which meant they were perfectly positioned to be a major player in trade. Gold, ivory, and ebony flowed through Kush like gossip through a high school cafeteria, and all that trade meant influence and cash. The Kushites weren't just passively soaking up Egyptian culture, they were actively shaping it. Now, let's debunk some myths. The kingdom of Kush isn't just a footnote in a dusty tome about ancient civilizations. Yeah, Egypt gets all the headlines, but the Kushites were handling their business with style and savvy. While the Egyptians were busy chiseling away at their stone monuments, the Kushites were making strategic moves that would leave even the savviest modern politician a bit envious. And that's not to say there wasn't some romance to it all. The legends of Nubian warriors, fierce and proud, still capture imaginations today. But this isn't just a tale of battles and conquests. It's a story of resilience, adaptation, and a little bit of luck. The Kushites managed to maintain their identity despite being under the shadow of a superpower, and that's no small feat. The city of Kerma was the beating heart of this early Kushite civilization. It wasn't just a collection of huts in the middle of nowhere. By 1750 BCE, Kerma had developed into a bustling urban center, complete with massive mud brick structures known as defufas. These weren't your average mud huts. They were colossal, towering over the city like ancient skyscrapers. The grandest of them all, the western defufa, stands at an imposing height of about 3 stories. Take that, New York's skyline. These defufas were likely used for religious purposes, but their exact function remains a mystery, like the ancient version of unsolved mysteries. Economic prowess and a strategic location meant that Kerma wasn't just an isolated city, but a crucial node in a vast network of trade routes. The Kushites were adept traders, and they knew how to leverage their position. They traded with the Egyptians, of course, but also with other cultures further afield. The wealth amassed through this commerce was reflected in the opulence of their tombs, which were packed with luxury goods, a sure sign that these folks weren't living hand-to-mouth. Being both conquerors and the conquered, the Kushites had a unique perspective on power. They knew what it was like to be on top, but they also understood the reality of being under another's thumb. This duality shaped their worldview and their interactions with Egypt. They weren't just passive recipients of Egyptian culture. They were active participants in a cultural exchange that spanned centuries. One of the most fascinating aspects of Kushite history is their cultural and religious practices. They worshipped a pantheon of gods, some shared with Egypt, but they also had their own deities, reflecting their distinct identity. The god Ammon, for instance, was a central figure in both Egyptian and Kushite religion, but the Kushites added their own twist. They believed Ammon resided in a sacred mountain in their homeland, which gave them a unique claim to the god's favor. It's like having a direct line to the divine heartline, while everyone else is stuck on hold. Kush's relationship with Egypt was complex, to say the least. At times they were allies, trading partners, and cultural collaborators. At other times, they were rivals, locked in a struggle for dominance along the Nile. The ebb and flow of this relationship is a testament to the resilience and adaptability of the Kushites. They were masters of the art of survival, able to navigate the shifting tides of power with a deftness that would make a modern diplomat take notes. So, the next time you think of ancient civilizations, remember that the kingdom of Kush was more than just a shadow of Egypt. They were a dynamic, thriving culture in their own right, with a legacy that continues to intrigue and inspire. Who knows, maybe the next time you see a pyramid, you'll think of the Kushites, the original architects of Nile-side chic. Now, let's dive into the Napatan period, where the kingdom of Kush wasn't just a footnote in someone else's story. They were headlining their own epic saga. Picture this. Around 800 BCE, the Kushites decided they weren't content to just be the cool neighbor with the over-the-fence chat. They wanted the whole block. So, they did what any ambitious kingdom might do. They marched north and took over Egypt. And we're not talking about a quick weekend getaway. They settled in for the long haul, kicking off what became known as the 25th dynasty. Here's how it went down. Pi, the big cheese of Kush, waltzed into Egypt around 747 BCE and said, "Nice place you've got here. Mind if we rule it for a while?" And rule it they did. Pi wasn't content with just being a local warlord. He crowned himself pharaoh and effectively turned the tables on the long-standing dynamic between Kush and Egypt. It was like the underdog team winning the championship, except with more pyramids and fewer Gatorade showers. The 25th dynasty was when Kushite pharaohs rocked the Egyptian throne like they owned the place, because, well, they did. This wasn't just a hostile takeover, it was a merger of cultures, with the Kushites bringing their unique flair to the Egyptian court. They adopted Egyptian hieroglyphs and religious practices, but with a twist that was distinctly Kushite. Imagine them serving hieroglyphs with a side of spicy Nubian flair, making sure their identity didn't get lost in the shuffle of dynastic politics. Speaking of spice, let's talk about Taharqa, one of the most famous Kushite pharaohs. If being a pharaoh was an Olympic sport, Taharqa would have been a gold medalist. His reign, starting around 690 BCE, was marked by ambitious building projects and military campaigns. He was like the ancient world's version of a startup CEO, expanding territories, upgrading infrastructure, and trying to keep his regional rivals at bay. Under Taharqa, the Kushite Empire stretched from modern-day Sudan all the way to the Mediterranean coast. That's like running a business that operates from New York to LA, but with fewer board meetings and more chariots. But let's not romanticize too much. The reality was that ruling Egypt wasn't all hieroglyphs and sunshine. The Assyrians were lurking in the shadows like an ancient big bad wolf, ready to huff and puff at anyone who stepped out of line. And step out of line they did, eventually turning their sights on the Kushite-controlled Egypt. The Assyrians weren't just any old empire. They were the kind of military powerhouse that made other empires sleep with one eye open. When they decided to invade Egypt in 671 BCE, it wasn't a polite knock at the door. It was more like kicking it down with the subtlety of a rock concert. The Assyrians eventually forced the Kushites to retreat to their homeland, but let's give credit where it's due. The Kushites didn't just pack up and go home like a defeated sports team. They regrouped, and their cultural and political influence continued to be felt long after they left Egypt. It was a bit like leaving a party, but ensuring everyone remembers your dance moves. Economically, the Kushite Empire thrived on its strategic location. They had one foot in Africa and the other in the Middle East, a bit like straddling two continents with a trade route running between them. Gold, ivory, and slaves flowed through their kingdom, making Kush a commercial powerhouse. It was as if they had a monopoly on the ancient world's luxury goods, not unlike owning a chain of high-end boutiques in prime locations. This trade wasn't just about wealth. It was about influence, spreading Kushite culture and ideas far beyond their borders. Now, let's tackle a myth or two. The narrative of Kushite pharaohs as mere imitators of Egyptian culture is about as accurate as calling a cover band the same as the original group. Sure, they adopted Egyptian customs, but they put their own spin on things. The Kushites didn't just mimic Egyptian art. They infused it with their own stylistic elements, creating a hybrid culture that was uniquely theirs. It was like remixing a classic tune into something fresh and unexpected. Politically, the Kushite rulers were adept at playing the long game. They knew that alliances could be as fickle as a teenager's mood, so they were masters of diplomacy, balancing power with the likes of Assyria and other neighboring powers. Their ability to navigate these treacherous political waters is a testament to their strategic acumen. It's reminiscent of modern-day power players who can shake hands with one rival while keeping an eye on the next. So, as you ponder the ancient world, remember that the kingdom of Kush was more than just a kingdom in the shadow of Egypt. They were a force to be reckoned with, a civilization that danced to its own beat even as it played on the world stage. The Napatan period was their golden age, a time when they looked the Egyptian empire in the eye and said, "Let's see what you've got." And for a while, it seemed like they had the world in the palm of their hands, or at least the Nile. As we continue this journey, keep in mind that the story doesn't end here. There's more to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more history to unravel. Stay tuned, because the saga of Kush is far from over. And as we glide into the next chapter of Kush's epic, let's slip into the hustle and bustle of Meroe, their swanky capital city, where the real magic happened. Picture a city where the clang of iron was as common as the morning call of a rooster. That's right, Meroe was the Silicon Valley of its time, only the tech was iron smelting. Long before the Romans were flexing their engineering muscles, the Kushites had turned this place into a smelting hotspot. We're talking about a full-blown industrial complex fueled by the iron-rich soil, and oh boy, did they milk it. Now, let's break this down. Iron was the lifeline of Meroe's economy. It was the Kushite version of oil, but without the environmental PR disaster. Around 400 BCE, Meroe was churning out tools and weapons that made their neighbors green with envy. That meant power, both economically and militarily. Iron smelting was more than just a craft. It was a game changer. With these tools, agriculture flourished, trade routes expanded, and military prowess grew. Forget bronze, iron was the new black, but it wasn't just about iron. The kingdom of Kush had a knack for trade that would make even modern entrepreneurs sit up and take notes. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animals were the star players in their commercial lineup. Gold flowed from the mines of Nubia like water from a busted dam. Ivory was a luxury commodity, with Kushite traders moving it through caravan routes that stretched as far as India and China. It's like having a finger in every pie, and these guys were the master bakers. The Kushites didn't just hoard wealth. They flaunted it with the kind of architectural flair that would put modern-day billionaires to shame. The pyramids of Meroe, numbering over 200, were smaller but steeper than their Egyptian counterparts. Each one was a testament to Kushite wealth and engineering prowess, funded by the relentless trade that pulsed through the city. And let's not forget the royal palaces and temples, lavishly decorated to showcase the kingdom's might and sophistication. These weren't just buildings, they were Kushite billboards, advertising their power and prestige to the world. Now, let's talk about international relations. The Kushites were no strangers to the geopolitical chessboard. They played the game with Rome, the colossal empire that was the ancient equivalent of a global superpower. At times, they sparred with Roman generals, and other times, cut deals like seasoned diplomats. Remember, Rome wasn't built in a day, but neither was Kush, and they were determined to keep their sovereignty intact. When the Romans came knocking around 23 BCE, with intentions as subtle as a bull in a china shop, the Kushites didn't just roll over. They negotiated a peace treaty that allowed them to continue their trade without losing face. That's some high-stakes diplomacy, folks. Dealing with Rome was one thing, but keeping local rivals in check was another. The Kushites had to be savvy, maintaining a balance of power that would make any modern strategist proud. They knew when to flex their military might and when to extend a diplomatic olive branch. It was a delicate dance, and they performed it with the grace of a seasoned ballet dancer. Not an easy feat when the stakes included your kingdom's survival. But let's not gloss over the gritty realities. The wealth of Kush wasn't just built on the back of iron and gold. Slavery was a harsh truth of the time, and Kush, like many empires, relied on forced labor to keep its economic engine purring. Slaves were traded alongside ivory and gold, a grim reminder of the human cost behind the grandeur. It's uncomfortable but essential to acknowledge that while Meroe was a marvel of innovation and wealth, it was also a place where human lives were commoditized. Yet, in the midst of this, Kushite culture thrived. They developed their own script, Meroidic, a language that remains largely undeciphered today, a tantalizing mystery for linguists and historians. Their art and sculpture blended Egyptian influences with African styles, creating a cultural tapestry that was as rich as their trade routes. The Kushites were proud of their heritage, fiercely independent, and determined to leave their mark on history. So, as we inch closer to unraveling more of Kush's story, remember that Meroe was more than just a capital. It was the heart of an empire that pulsed with ambition, innovation, and a touch of swagger. They were the architects of their own destiny, navigating the complex world of ancient geopolitics with a deftness that would surprise even the most seasoned of modern diplomats. Stay tuned, because the saga of Kush is a tale with more twists than a Nile riverbend, and we're just getting started. But even the steeliest of capitals can have its Achilles heel, and for Kush, the cracks began to show around 300 CE. Meroe, once the bustling hub of iron smelting and trade, that made even the Romans sit up and take notice, started to feel the pressure. The rich veins of iron ore that had fueled its economy were becoming as elusive as a mirage in the Sahara. Translation: resource depletion wasn't just knocking on the door, it was barging in like an uninvited guest at a royal banquet. Now, let's talk climate. It's not just a 21st century buzzword for debates. Picture the region getting drier, like someone turned the Nile's faucet to a slow drip. The once fertile lands that fed both bellies and coffers started to struggle. Agriculture, the backbone of any ancient economy worth its salt, was on shaky ground. The climate was shifting in a way that made even the most seasoned farmers scratch their heads. Internally, Kush had its own set of homegrown problems. Political unity began to unravel like a cheap sweater, with factions squabbling for power in a way that would put modern political parties to shame. This internal strife wasn't just a nuisance, It was a full-blown existential crisis. A kingdom that once boasted a single, cohesive identity found itself splintering into a patchwork of power struggles. The once mighty monarchy was dealing with succession disputes that could rival a soap opera plotline. Externally, the geopolitical chessboard was no friendlier. Encroaching neighbors, sensing weakness like sharks to blood, began eyeing Kush's territories with the kind of ambition that could turn a friendly game of Risk into an all-out war. To the north, the rise of the Aksumite Empire in what is now Ethiopia was like a ticking time bomb. These guys weren't just content with expanding their borders. They were looking at Kush like a prime piece of real estate, and they had the military muscle to back it up. But Axum wasn't the only player looking to cash in on Kush's misfortunes. The once friendly trade routes that had brought wealth and influence were becoming more dangerous than a Nile craft. Raids and skirmishes became the order of the day, making trade a risky business akin to playing Russian roulette with a loaded gun. The Kushites found themselves caught in a vice grip of internal and external pressures that would make even the most hardened leader break into a cold sweat. Economically, the fallout was swift and brutal. The decline in iron production was like taking away a musician's instrument, crippling. Without its industrial backbone, the Kushite economy started to resemble a sinking ship. The once bustling markets of Merere, stocked with goods from across the ancient world, began to thin out. The opulence that had been a hallmark of Kushite power started to evaporate, leaving behind a kingdom grappling with the harsh realities of scarcity. Yet, amid this decline, the cultural footprint of the Kushites was anything but fading into obscurity. Their art, language, and architectural innovations continued to inspire. The pyramids of Merere, those steep, elegant structures, stood as silent sentinels to a legacy that refused to be erased. The Meroitic script, still largely undeciphered, remains a tantalizing enigma for historians and linguists alike. It's a reminder that even as the kingdom crumbled, its cultural achievements left an indelible mark. The Kushites may have been down, but they weren't out. Their influence extended beyond borders and time, weaving into the cultural tapestry of Africa and beyond. They were a testament to resilience, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the annals of history. So, as the kingdom of Kush faced its twilight years, it's clear that their story wasn't just about an empire's rise and fall. It was about the ebbs and flows of human endeavor, the dance of power and survival in a world that was as unpredictable as the desert winds. And while the kingdom may have ultimately succumbed to the forces arrayed against it, the legacy of Kush, a civilization that dared to dream big and write its own chapter in history, remains very much alive. But don't touch that dial just yet. There's more to this saga, a final act that promises to unravel even more mysteries of this once great empire. Stay tuned. As the haze of history began to settle over the once mighty kingdom of Kush, its story didn't just flicker out like a dying candle. Instead, it smoldered beneath the sands of time, waiting for a modern spotlight to reveal its hidden brilliance. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, when intrepid archaeologists, with shovels and a penchant for discovery, began to peel back the layers of this forgotten empire. It was as if someone had found an old, dusty vinyl record and decided to give it a spin, only to realize it was a chart-topping hit in its own right. The rediscovery of Kush wasn't just about digging up old bones and broken pottery. It was about reshaping narratives, both literally and metaphorically. The once overlooked pyramids of Merere, standing more numerous than their Egyptian counterparts, suddenly found themselves under the spotlight, reminding the world that pyramids were not an Egyptian monopoly. By the way, those pyramids weren't just there for tourists to gawk at. The smaller, steeper structures of Kush served as royal tombs, each with its own story, each a testament to the kingdom's wealth and architectural prowess. Here's where things get interesting. The Kushites weren't just Egypt's understudies, waiting in the wings for their curtain call. They were key players in their own right, a civilization that shaped and was shaped by the currents of the ancient world. The resurgence of interest in Kush challenged the long-held Eurocentric narratives that positioned Egypt as the sole luminary of African antiquity. It was like suddenly discovering that the quiet kid in the back of the class had been acing all the tests all along. Modern archaeology and technology have played significant roles in piecing together the Kushite puzzle. Carbon dating, ground-penetrating radar, and satellite imagery have all been game-changers, allowing us to understand the scale and sophistication of Kushite society. It's like the ultimate CSI episode where science resurrects the past in technicolor detail. But let's get real for a second. As romantic as the rediscovery of Kush sounds, it's not without its harsh realities. The romanticized tales of Nubian warriors and exotic queens often overshadowed the grittier narratives of political intrigue, economic strife, and cultural resilience. The Kushites weren't just noble savages, standing nobly against the sands of time. They were real people dealing with real issues, from resource depletion to political fragmentation. And here's a zinger for you. The rediscovery of Kush has forced historians to confront their own biases and assumptions. It's a bit like realizing that your family photo album has been missing entire chapters. The myth of Africa as a continent without history has been debunked, with Kush standing as a vibrant example of African ingenuity and influence. This isn't just about correcting the historical record. It's about rebalancing the scales of cultural significance. The lessons from Kush's resilience and innovation are not just historical footnotes. They carry weight in today's world. Kingdom's strategic use of geography, mastery of iron technology, and ability to adapt to changing climates are all relevant in our modern era. The Kushites were the ultimate pragmatists, understanding that survival depended on flexibility and foresight. In a world facing its own resource challenges and climate shifts, there's a lot to learn from an empire that thrived in the harshest of environments. Kush's legacy is like a tapestry, rich with threads of culture, power, and survival. Its influence stretched far beyond its borders, leaving an indelible mark on the cultural and political landscape of Africa and beyond. This isn't just a story of pyramids and pharaohs. It's a tale of human ingenuity and the timeless struggle for identity and autonomy in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, the Kingdom of Kush is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a reminder that the past is never truly lost. It's just waiting to be rediscovered and reinterpreted. As we continue to unearth the secrets of this ancient civilization, we're not just learning about Kush. We're learning about ourselves, our biases, and the stories we choose to tell. So next time you find yourself pondering the mysteries of the past, remember that the sands of history are full of surprises, and the story of Kush is one that still resonates, echoing through the annals of time with the clarity of a Nile sunset. In the bustling heart of ancient Rome, where chaos was as constant as the rising sun, the city's water management system was about as organized as a toga party with no togas. There were streams and wells, sure, but unless you lived next to one, or had a penchant for bucket-carrying marathons, getting water was a bit like trying to find Wi-Fi in a desert. The Romans were brilliant in many ways, but in these early days, their water situation was more meh than magnificent. Enter stage left, Appius Claudius Caecus. You can call him the original Roman problem solver. In 312 BC, Appius took one look at the water woes of Rome and thought, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And he wasn't wrong. Rome was expanding faster than a social media influencer's follow account, and the city's water needs were growing just as quickly. The existing wells and springs were like trying to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool with a garden hose, totally inadequate. Something had to give. Appius, with a flair for the dramatic and a knack for political maneuvering, decided it was time to bring the city into a new age of waterworks. Here's where the story gets juicy. You see, Appius wasn't just any politician. He was a censor. Now, that might sound like a job involving red pens and creative editing, but in Roman terms, it meant he was one of the most powerful dudes in town. Censors were tasked with maintaining the census, overseeing public morality, and most importantly for us, spending public money on infrastructure. And oh boy, did Appius spend. Appius spearheaded the construction of Rome's first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, which wasn't just a solution to a practical problem. It was also a massive flex of Roman engineering muscle, a sign that Rome was ready to play with the big boys of the ancient world. The Aqua Appia stretched for over 16 kilometers, mostly underground, which was probably a good thing, since above ground might have led to more column-related accidents. It was a marvel of engineering for its time, with a gentle slope that allowed gravity to do the heavy lifting, guiding water all the way from springs in the Anio Valley right into the heart of Rome. Now, let's talk about the cost. Building the Aqua Pier didn't come cheap. The project was a financial behemoth, but Appius had a vision. He knew that access to fresh water was about more than just survival. It was about power. Clean water meant healthier citizens, which translated to a stronger workforce and military. Plus, it made life in Rome just a little bit more bearable. No small feat in a city where sanitation was still a work in progress. But Appius wasn't just about practicality. He was savvy enough to understand the political capital that came with such a project. By giving the people what they desperately needed, he cemented his legacy. His name would be remembered not just as another Roman politician, but as a pioneer who literally laid the groundwork for Rome's future growth. And grow it did. With the Aqua Pier in place, Rome's population could expand, and the city could continue its rise as a dominant Mediterranean power. Aqueduct was a game-changer, but it also set a precedent. Over the coming centuries, Rome would build more aqueducts, each more ambitious than the last. The Aqua Pier was the first step on a long road of engineering innovation that would eventually see Rome with over 400 kilometers of aqueducts. That's like building a water pipeline from New York City to Washington, D.C. And all of this started because one man looked at a mess and thought, we can do better. Of course, the romanticized version of Appius Claudius Caecus paints him as a visionary hero, single-handedly transforming Rome's infrastructure. The reality, as always, is a bit muddier. Appius wasn't just motivated by altruism. He had power to gain and a name to build. His aqueduct project was as much about securing his legacy as it was about quenching Rome's thirst. But hey, who are we to judge? After all, the roads to greatness often run parallel to roads of self-interest. So the next time you take a sip of water, maybe give a little nod to Appius. He may not have had the best eyesight. His nickname, Caecus, means blind. But he sure had a vision for the future. This was just the beginning of Rome's love affair with water, a tale of stone, sweat, and a whole lot of strategic thinking. And if you've ever wondered why the Romans were so obsessed with their baths, well, stay tuned. This is just the start of a story that's going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about ancient Rome. Just as Appius Claudius Caecus had laid the cornerstone of Rome's watery future, the city's thirst for H2O and power only intensified. Fast forward a couple of centuries, throw in some political intrigue, and what do you get? The Aqua Marcia, baby, the longest aqueduct of its time, constructed in 144 BC. This wasn't just another addition to Rome's burgeoning waterworks. It was the aqueduct equivalent of a red carpet rollout. Behind it, all was a cast of characters who rivaled any reality TV show for drama, ambition, and sheer tenacity. Meet Quintus Marcius Rex. He wasn't a king, despite what his last name might have you believe, but he sure acted like one when it came to building the Aqua Marcia. As a praetor, role involving more than just adjudicating brawls at the Forum, Marcius Rex was tasked with overseeing public works. His mission, to sate the parched mouths of a Rome that was expanding like waistlines during the holiday season. The answer was the Aqua Marcia, stretching a staggering 91 kilometers, or about the distance of a modern marathon, if you're into that kind of punishment. Now, you might think, why not just build another underground river and call it a day? But here's where the Aqua Marcia stood out. It was a high-level aqueduct, which meant it wasn't hiding beneath the ground like some shy mole. Nope, this baby strutted its stuff across the Roman countryside on towering arches, making it the ancient equivalent of a skyscraper. It was an architectural flex that screamed, "Look at us, we're Rome." It brought water from the springs in the Anio Valley, not too far from Tivoli, and it did so with a gradient so precise it would make your trigonometry teacher weep tears of joy. While we can wax poetic about the arches and the engineering brilliance, let's not forget the unsung heroes of this story, the Roman engineers and laborers. These folks were the real MVPs, sweating it out under the Italian sun, armed with little more than chisels, ropes, and a healthy disregard for health and safety regulations. They carved channels through rock, erected colossal arches, and did it all with a level of precision that would give today's surveyors a run for their money. It's easy to imagine them as grumbling, gritty characters, but without their relentless toil, Rome's aqueducts would be nothing more than a pipe dream. And while we're at it, let's debunk one of those romanticized myths that history loves to peddle. The idea that Roman engineering was a solo endeavor of genius masterminds. No, the reality was much more collaborative and, frankly, grimy. The construction of these aqueducts was a team effort, requiring thousands of laborers, many of whom were slaves or lowly paid workers. These were the folks who chipped away at stone, trudged through dirt, and quite literally built the backbone of Rome's infrastructure. Their contributions were as crucial as those of any senator or emperor, even if their names are lost to history. Now, let's talk logistics and economics because, spoiler alert, building an aqueduct wasn't like putting together an IKEA shelf. It was a financial juggernaut. The Aqua Marcia didn't just cost a few sacks of denarii, it required a chunk of Rome's treasury. But the Romans were nothing if not strategic. They understood that water wasn't just a necessity, it was a commodity, a tool for control. By ensuring a constant supply of fresh water, Rome could support a growing population, sustain its bathhouses, a cornerstone of Roman social life, and crucially, maintain its political grip on the region. Clean water was power, plain and simple. The Aqua Marcia was also a testament to Rome's growing sophistication and ambition. By the time it was completed, it was supplying about 182,000 cubic meters of water per day. That's like filling over 70 Olympic-sized swimming pools every single day. Imagine the cannonballs. But beyond the splash, there was a serious side to all this water management. It kept the city's fountains flowing, its public baths steaming, and its citizens happy, or at least less likely to riot due to dehydration. This was more than just an engineering marvel. It was a political statement. In a city where political careers could rise and fall like the Roman temperatures, the Aqua Marcia was a tangible legacy for Marcius Rex. It was a physical manifestation of Rome's might and Marcius's shrewdness, ensuring his name would be inscribed into the annals of history, quite literally, since the aqueduct bore his name. Yet, let's not get too caught up in the grand narratives and forget the nitty-gritty. The Aqua Marcia wasn't built overnight. It took years of planning and construction, countless hours of back-breaking labor, and a fair share of political wrangling. And despite the grandeur, it wasn't all smooth sailing. Maintenance was a continuous battle against nature's relentless encroachment. Inspectors, known as curators aquarum, were tasked with ensuring the aqueducts ran smoothly, a job that was as glamorous as it sounds. They had to deal with blockages, leaks, and the occasional sabotage, because who doesn't love a bit of Roman drama? So, as Rome's thirst grew, so did its infrastructure. The Aqua Marcia was just one chapter in a story of innovation, ambition, and a relentless pursuit of control over nature. It was a tale of stone and sweat, of political maneuvering and engineering prowess. And while the legends might focus on the builders and the politicians, the reality was a complex tapestry of human effort and ingenuity. The aqueducts weren't just about quenching Rome's thirst. They were about building a legacy that would flow through history like the waters they carried. As we journey further into Rome's aquatic adventures, remember this. Every drop of water that flowed into the city was a testament to human determination and the relentless pursuit of progress. And while the aqueducts stand as monuments to Rome's glory, they also remind us of the countless hands that shaped them, working tirelessly to keep the city alive. We'll dive deeper into this watery world in our next installment, exploring more of the engineering feats and the stories behind them. So, stay tuned, because Rome's love affair with water is far from over. As the saga of Rome's aqueducts unfolded, it was clear that these marvels of engineering were more than just elaborate plumbing. They were the Roman Empire's flex, a concrete, or rather, stone testament to its ambition, power, and resourcefulness. Picture the grandeur of an emperor, standing on the steps of the Senate, gesturing towards the horizon, and declaring that the city would never run dry. This wasn't just a promise of hydration. It was a manifesto of dominance, an assurance that Rome would continue to grow, thrive, and most importantly, rule. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty, shall we? Rome's population was ballooning faster than a kid with a balloon pump, and it needed infrastructure to match. By the 1st century AD, the city was home to over 1 million people. That's like stuffing the entire population of modern-day San Francisco into an ancient metropolis, minus the sourdough bread and tech startups. How do you keep such a city from turning into a dusty, dehydrated mess? The answer was aqueducts. Lots of them. We're talking about an investment that would make today's big-budget infrastructure projects look like pocket change. The cost of constructing these aqueducts was mind-boggling. Take the Aqua Claudia, for instance, completed in 52 AD. It stretched 69 kilometers and cost about 350 million sestertii. For context, a sestrius was roughly equivalent to a day's wages for a common laborer. So, think of it as the ancient equivalent of burning through a few $1 billion today. And yet, the Romans thought it was a worthy price to pay. The emperors understood the economics of water better than anyone. They knew that having a steady supply of water was like holding the keys to the kingdom. It allowed them to support a massive population and keep them, if not happy, then at least less likely to riot. It also fueled Rome's urban expansion, ensuring that the city could keep spreading its marble wings. With water flowing freely, Rome's public baths, fountains, and gardens could flourish, making the city not just habitable, but a beacon of civilization. But let's not get carried away with the romanticism of it all. The reality was far grittier. The maintenance of these aqueducts required an army of inspectors, engineers, and laborers. The city employed a team known as the curators aquarum, who were tasked with keeping the water flowing smoothly. Their job was to ensure that the aqueducts didn't become clogged with debris or, worse, become the target of sabotage. Yes, you heard right, sabotage. In a city where political rivalries could turn deadly, cutting off a water supply was a surefire way to make a statement. And then there were the taxes. Someone had to foot the bill for all this water, and that someone was the Roman taxpayer. The upkeep of the aqueducts was funded by public money, and the Romans weren't shy about taxing their citizens to maintain their infrastructure. But here's the kicker. The aqueducts didn't just serve the public good. They were also a means of control. By owning the water supply, the emperors held a vital resource in their hands. It was a power move, a way to keep the city dependent on imperial largesse. This power dynamic was on full display during the reign of Emperor Augustus, who used the aqueducts to cement his rule. Augustus was a master of optics, and he understood that providing clean, abundant water was a surefire way to win public favor. He famously repaired and expanded the aqueduct system, adding the Aqua Virgo to the roster. This aqueduct, completed in 19 BC, was a triumph of engineering, bringing fresh water into the heart of Rome. It was a literal lifeline for the city, and Augustus made sure everyone knew it was his doing. But let's not pretend this was purely an act of benevolence. Augustus was as shrewd as they come, and he knew that controlling the water supply was a way to control the populace. It was a classic carrot and stick approach. Keep the water flowing, and the citizens are placated, threaten to cut it off, and they fall into line. It was governance through aqueduct, and it worked like a charm. Meanwhile, the aqueducts played a pivotal role in supporting Rome's economy. The constant supply of water was a boon for agriculture, allowing the city to sustain its ever-growing population. It also fueled industries like textile production and metalworking, which relied on water for various processes. In this way, the aqueducts were the lifeblood of Rome's economic engine, driving growth and prosperity. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The construction and maintenance of these massive structures were fraught with challenges. The Romans had to contend with difficult terrain, unpredictable weather, and the ever-present threat of collapse. They built aqueducts with meticulous precision, employing techniques that were astonishingly advanced for their time. They used concrete, a Roman innovation, to reinforce their structures, and they employed the arch, a design marvel that allowed them to span valleys and rivers with ease. Despite these innovations, the aqueducts were not immune to disaster. Earthquakes, floods, and wear and tear took their toll, requiring constant repairs and upgrades. The Aqua Annio Novus, one of the longest aqueducts, was notorious for its maintenance headaches. It stretched over 87 kilometers and had to be continuously monitored for leaks and blockages. The Romans were nothing if not persistent, though, and they tackled each challenge with a tenacity that would make even the most stubborn modern engineer proud. In the end, the aqueducts were a testament to the power and ingenuity of Rome. They were a symbol of the empire's might, a reminder of its ability to bend nature to its will. But they were also a reflection of the society that built them, a society that understood the importance of infrastructure, that valued public works, and that wasn't afraid to invest in the future. The aqueducts were Rome's gift to itself, a legacy of stone and water that would endure long after the empire's fall. As we continue our journey through Rome's aquatic adventures, we'll uncover more stories of triumph and tribulation, of ambition and adversity. The tale of the aqueducts is far from over, and there are more secrets to be revealed. So stay tuned, because in the world of ancient Rome, the water was always flowing, and so was the drama. As the Romans built their aqueducts, they weren't just crafting architectural wonders. They were weaving a complex tapestry of engineering triumphs, societal shifts, and let's face it, a few dirty secrets. Now, before you get carried away imagining pristine water gliding effortlessly through marble channels, let's shatter that rose-tinted vision. The truth is, aqueducts were as much a headache as they were a triumph. These stone behemoths demanded constant maintenance and a veritable army of workers to keep them functioning. Picture a never-ending game of whack-a-mole, but with leaks, blockages, and the occasional landslide. The reality of maintaining these aqueducts was far from glamorous. The so-called curators aquarum were the unsung heroes, or perhaps just the unfortunate souls, tasked with ensuring the water kept flowing. Armed with rudimentary tools and a lot of elbow grease, these guys dealt with everything from mineral deposits, calcium buildup, anyone, to the occasional collapse of an aqueduct segment. Forget about the idea of serene water gently flowing, think more of a plumbing nightmare. And while we're on the subject of romantic myths, let's talk water purity. The ideal of crystal-clear streams feeding Rome's fountains and baths. Yeah, not so much. The reality was a bit murkier, literally. Water theft was rampant, with locals tapping into the aqueducts for their own private use. Imagine a Roman busting out a DIY project to divert water into their villa, an ancient equivalent of borrowing your neighbor's Wi-Fi without asking. This borrowed water often bypassed the city's filtration systems, leading to less than pristine water reaching the masses. So, if you ever wondered why the Romans were so fond of their wine, it might just be because it was safer to drink. The battle against nature was another uphill struggle. Those elegant arches and stone channels weren't impervious to the elements. Erosion, earthquakes, and floods had a nasty habit of turning Rome's water supply into a series of unfortunate events. And when disaster struck, it was the local populace who felt the pinch, often facing water shortages that could last weeks or even months. For a city as dependent on its aqueducts as a modern one is on electricity, this was no small issue. But let's switch gears from the nitty-gritty of maintenance to the cultural tidal wave that Rome's aqueducts unleashed. These weren't just utilitarian constructs, they were the lifeblood of Roman society. The influx of water transformed urban life, giving rise to the iconic Roman bathhouses. These communal hubs weren't just about hygiene, they were social epicenters where Romans could unwind, gossip, and seal political deals, all while soaking in scented water. Imagine a spa day, minus the cucumber slices, and with a lot more toga-clad intrigue. The aqueducts also turned Rome into a city of fountains, each one more extravagant than the last. These were the Instagram spots of the ancient world, minus the hashtags, but with plenty of marble statues. Fountains were a public demonstration of wealth and power, a visual reminder that Rome could bend nature to its will. They were the splashes of opulence that punctuated the cityscape, ensuring that even the most mundane of days could end with a stroll past a gushing, sculpted masterpiece. And of course, the economic impact was as enormous as the aqueducts themselves. By providing a reliable water source, Rome's aqueducts fueled industries that were key to the empire's prosperity. Agriculture thrived, artisans and craftsmen flourished, and the city's markets buzzed with activity. Water was the silent partner in Rome's economic success, a backstage hero that made the whole production possible. But behind the grandeur lay a more sobering reality. The aqueducts, while marvels of engineering, also symbolized Rome's relentless quest for control and dominance. They were a tool of power, a reminder that the empire's reach extended even to the natural world. Yet, as Rome's leaders flexed their hydraulic muscles, the very water they controlled highlighted the empire's vulnerabilities. Any disruption, whether from natural disasters, sabotage, or plain old human error, could spell disaster for the city's inhabitants. In the end, the story of Rome's aqueducts is one of contrasts. It's a tale of ambition and adversity, of triumphs marred by challenges, and of a civilization that dared to dream big even as it grappled with the gritty realities of day-to-day life. As we continue to delve into this world of water and wonder, remember this. Rome's aqueducts were more than just feats of engineering. They were the arteries of an empire, carrying both the lifeblood and the burdens of a civilization that changed the course of history. And as the water flowed, so did the stories, each one a testament to the ingenuity and audacity of the Romans, who dared to dream of a world transformed by water. Stay with us as we journey deeper into the watery wonders of ancient Rome, where drama flowed as freely as the water itself. As the tales of antiquity's engineering prowess flow on like the aqueducts themselves, we arrive at a turning point in our story. Those majestic water channels that once stood as the lifelines of the mighty Roman Empire didn't just disappear like a Caesar in a political scandal. No, they crumbled more gradually, in a slow-motion collapse that mirrored the empire's own decline. Picture a grand procession that morphs into a sluggish shuffle, with aqueducts as relics of Rome's fading glory. The fall of Rome, an event that's been dramatized more than a soap opera breakup, brought about a cascade of consequences. By the 5th century AD, the Western Roman Empire was more patchwork quilt than cohesive empire. The aqueducts, those marvels of engineering, found themselves victims of neglect, warfare, and let's face it, a general lack of upkeep. Barbarian invasions didn't help matters either. They loved nothing more than a good infrastructure sabotage to spice up their conquests. The once mighty Aqua Claudia and Annio Novus, now resembling more ancient ruins than functional waterworks, became silent witnesses to Rome's decline. But let's not just blame the barbarians for the water woes. As the political cohesion of the empire disintegrated, so did the centralized systems that maintained these colossal structures. The local authorities, now without imperial support, had about as much chance of keeping the aqueducts running as a toga has pockets. Without regular maintenance, the aqueducts succumbed to the relentless grip of time, nature, and human indifference. Fast forward a millennium or so, and the Renaissance, a period that saw Europe waking up from its medieval nap, sparked a renewed interest in all things classical. Roman aqueducts, those long-forgotten masterpieces, were suddenly back in vogue. Scholars and engineers began to rediscover the ancient blueprints and marvel at the ingenuity of their forebears. It was like finding an old mixtape from high school and realizing your taste wasn't half bad. In the 16th century, the papacy, ever the trendsetter in all things grandiose, decided to get its hands dirty with some good old-fashioned aqueduct restoration. The Aqua Virgo, for example, was revived and continued to supply water to the Trevi Fountain. Yes, that Trevi Fountain. Toss a coin in, and besides wishing for luck, you might just thank an ancient Roman engineer for your fresh splash of water. The legacy of Roman aqueducts trickled into modern times, influencing water management systems across the globe. Understanding gravity-fed water systems. Check. The concept of public fountains as both functional and decorative. Double check. Even the idea of large-scale infrastructure projects as a demonstration of political power found its echo in modern society. When a government rolls out a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure project today, it's as much about showing off as it is about utility. Rome did it first, and they did it with style. But the real lesson from the Roman aqueducts isn't just about the grandeur or the engineering wizardry. It's about sustainability, resilience, and the foresight to plan for the future. These aqueducts were built to last. Well, when they were maintained, at least. They were designed with an understanding of the environment that even today's architects and engineers could learn from. Rome's aqueduct engineers knew that working with nature, rather than bulldozing over it, was the key to long-term success. In the end, the story of the Roman aqueducts is a reminder of both human ingenuity and our occasional short-sightedness. They symbolize the heights of achievement and the depths of decline, a testament to what can be accomplished with vision and what can be lost without vigilance. As we wrap up our watery tale, take a moment to appreciate the lessons these ancient structures offer. They teach us that while ambition can build wonders, it's the care, maintenance, and forward thinking that ensure those wonders endure. Because sometimes, the greatest teacher in history isn't the one with the loudest voice or the grandest gestures. It's the silent, steadfast flow of water through a Roman aqueduct.